For the past 3 years, each January, there is a bizarre online puzzle game that is hosted by someone who calls themselves 3301. Their symbol is a cicada. The complex puzzles draw on elements of cryptography, mathematics, literature, hidden messages, data security, and philosophy. Physical clues appear in places as diverse as Poland, Hawaii, Spain, Australia, and Korea. 3301 claims that its puzzles attempt to find intelligent individuals. However, they don't say why. Many people believe these nearly impossible puzzles are a recruitment vehicle for organizations like the CIA or MI6. Beginning in late August, an anonymous 4chan user began posting hundreds of never-before-seen private photos of celebrities that were stolen from their hacked iCloud accounts. The victims were mostly female and high-profile, such as Jennifer Lawrence, Scarlett Johansson, Kim Kardashian, and Kate Upton are just a few women whose accounts were compromised. Apple confirmed the hackers had obtained the images by means of a targeted attack, though we still don't know who or how many attackers were involved. The FBI has since said they were looking into the case. Nearly 4 dozen high school students disappeared in Mexico after police stopped them from traveling to a protest. The cops then reportedly handed over the students to a drug gang who investigators say killed them. However, their bodies have never been found. Nearly 80 people have been arrested following the kidnapping, including a mayor, his wife, and a local police chief. But without their bodies, the case remains unsolved. There's a 40-ton boulder located on the shores of the Taunton River in Massachusetts called the Dighton Rock, and it's covered in puzzling petroglyphs. For nearly 300 years, people have speculated about its origin and meaning. Investigators have been attempting to decode the odd glyphs since an English colonist first described the boulder in 1680, but they've had little success. In 1963, state officials removed the boulder and kept it for preservation. Most scholars think the stone carvings are of Native American origins. Some of the wilder theories have proposed that it was the work of the Portuguese, Chinese, or even the ancient Phoenicians. The Green Children of Woolpit were 2 children who appeared in the village of Woolpit in Suffolk, UK in the 12th century. The brother and sister had green-colored skin, even though they appeared normal in all other ways. They spoke an unrecognized language and refused to eat anything other than pitch from bean pods. Eventually, their skin lost its green color. After they learned English, they explained that they were from the land of St. Martin, which was a dark place because the sun never rose far above the horizon. They claimed that they were tending their father's herd and followed a river of light when they heard the sounds of bells. Then they arrived in Woolpit. Some of the more unusual theories proposed for the origin of the children are that they were Hollow Earth children, parallel dimension children, or extraterrestrial children. On June 30th, 1999, the body of Ricky McCormick was found in a field in St. Charles County, Missouri. McCormick had been missing for only 3 days, but his body was already badly decomposed. In 2011, the FBI revealed that they had found 2 notes in McCormick's pockets, written in a complex encrypted code. He was a high school dropout who could barely write his own name, making the whole thing even more strange. Even America's top cryptographers couldn't decrypt the text. In 1985, a metal drum containing the remains of a woman and young girl were discovered near the New Hampshire Bear Brook State Park. The 2 were related in some way, but they were never identified. 15 years later, another metal drum was discovered 100 feet away, this one containing the bodies of 2 more young girls, one of whom was related to the people found in 1985. The 4th victim, however, bore no relation to the others. The bodies had been so badly deteriorated that authorities say that they may have died as early as 1977. British Columbia Highway 16 has earned the nickname Highway of Tears because of the shocking number of women who have been murdered or gone missing from that road. From 1969 to 2006, 18 women have met that fate. The youngest victim was 12 years old. American serial killer Bobby Jack Fowler, who died in 2006, is suspected of having carried out 3 of the killings. Most of the others remain unsolved. On Christmas Eve, 1945, the house belonging to George and Jenny Sodder burnt to the ground. After the fire, 5 of their children were missing and presumed dead. However, no remains were ever found, and the fire had produced no smell of burning flesh. The fire was ruled an accident, faulty wiring on Christmas tree lights. However, the electricity in the house still worked when the fire started. In 1968, they received a bizarre note and photo, supposedly from their son Louis. The envelope was postmarked from Kentucky with no return address. The Sodders sent a private investigator to look into the matter. He disappeared and never contacted the Sodders again. The Gilgo Beach killer may still be on the loose. The Long Island serial killer, aka the Gilgo Beach killer, was responsible for at least 10 murders, maybe even as many as 17, between 1977 and 2013. Most of the dead were sex workers, but the victims also included a toddler who remains unidentified. NYPD detectives allegedly spoke to the killer by phone in 2009 and had narrowed down his location to somewhere in Times Square, but he somehow avoided the frantic search and may still be out there to this day.
This happened when I was really young. I'm talking 2nd or 3rd grade. It's hard for me to remember things clearly from that long ago, but this memory stands out for reasons you'll soon understand. It was a school day, and it had been raining cats and dogs all day. After picking me up from school, my parents left the house for some upscale events. I can't remember if it was a fundraiser or a dinner party or something else entirely. Either way, they were supposed to come back home that night, but while they were gone, the storm picked up like crazy, and it became unsafe to drive long distances. So instead of driving back home, they reluctantly decided to spend the night at one of their friends' houses who lived much closer to where the event was. I remember them calling me on the house phone and repeatedly apologizing for leaving me there by myself, even though I insisted that I wasn't even hungry and I'd be fine. My mom gave me a list of things to do before bed. Lock all the doors and windows, keep at least one house light on, make sure all the blinds were closed, typical stuff. At the time, I didn't understand why they were making such a big deal about everything. I wasn't quite old enough to realize how important it was to not leave kids my age home alone. In fact, I was actually kind of excited to have the place to myself. It meant unlimited candy and no bedtime. I obviously didn't have a TV or any kind of screen in my room, so I stayed downstairs in the living room watching TV on the couch. I told myself I'd do all that stuff my mom had requested right before going to sleep, since I was planning on staying up all night anyway. But at some point later in the night, the sugar crash got to me and I accidentally fell asleep. No surprise there. I don't remember exactly what time I ended up waking up, but it was late enough for the TV to have gone into sleep mode, so 3 hours minimum. I distinctly remember being much colder when I woke up. Nothing too out of the ordinary. I mean, temperatures drop at night, but the difference was significant enough for me to instantly make the connection, even at that young age. I thought about just curling back up and going back to sleep, but then I remembered the list my mom had given me. Even at that age, I knew she'd find out if I didn't do it, and I really didn't want to get in trouble after she trusted me to stay home alone. So I forced myself off the couch and went to check the windows and doors. I went around and did everything she asked. Locked the front and back doors, closed all the blinds, checked the windows, even the light. Everything was shut tight, which confused me a little because the house still felt way colder than it should have. I even put my hand against a couple of the windows to make sure they weren't cracked open or something, but they were all sealed. I figured maybe the storm knocked out the heater or something, and I didn't think much more about it. That explanation made sense to me at the time, and I was so tired that I couldn't devote more energy to thinking about the heat. So I headed upstairs to my room, ready to crawl into bed and forget about it. When I got to my room, I finally realized just how bad the storm had gotten. Our living room is tucked into the center of the house, so I hadn't really been able to appreciate the storm from down there. My childhood bedroom has a big external window though, so I could hear everything. The rain was slamming against the glass like it was trying to get in, and every minute or so there was a burst of lightning followed by a deafening clash of thunder. I wasn't scared of storms at that age, but I do remember being concerned that a tree was going to fall on the house. That's probably why I had trouble falling back asleep, even though I had been dead tired not even 20 minutes prior. As I was lying there, trying to fall asleep, I started picking up on these odd sounds. Every so often, there were these weird creaking sounds, like shifting wood. Thing is, the entire floor is carpeted, so it couldn't have been coming from my room. At first, I thought it was a tree swaying in the wind, but the sound didn't quite fit. Even then, I knew the general sounds associated with thunderstorms. This definitely wasn't one of them. It started bothering me after a while. For whatever reason, it wasn't the storm keeping me up. It was that stupid sound. I couldn't take it much longer, so I sat up and looked around the room, not really sure what I was looking for. I listened, trying to drown out the sounds of the storm and focus in on the creaking. Lightning flashed, illuminating the whole room. Everything looked normal, but my eyes were drawn to the only wooden thing in the room, the closet. The room went dark again, and I sat there perfectly still. About a minute later, lightning flashed again, and my room was once again lit up for just a split second. And in that split second, I saw something that made me choke. The closet door was slightly ajar. It had been closed before, I was 100% sure of it. Something had opened it. There was something in my room. I didn't scream, I didn't speak, I didn't even think. I just got out of bed as quietly as I could and walked out of the room. That walk from the bed to the door felt like a 500-mile, 5-year journey. I immediately went downstairs and hid under the dining room table. Then, and only then, I started crying. I didn't know what else to do. There was someone in my house, in my room, and my parents were too far away to help me. I'm not sure how long I stayed under that table, but at one point, I heard footsteps walking down the stairs. I held my breath, knowing that any sound I made could have ended my life. They weren't normal footsteps. It sounded like whatever it was jumping and pinballing down the stairs. The footsteps got closer. They were approaching the dining room table like they knew where I was hiding. I can't tell you how scared I was. I really thought I was gonna die. And then, from under the table, I saw them. I couldn't see their upper body, but 2 bare feet walked into view. 2 nasty, wet, and muddy legs that were tinted yellow. I couldn't tell if they were male or female legs. That's how gross and almost disfigured they looked. There were cuts all over their legs, like they had rolled around in a thorn bush. They were also stumbling, like they were struggling to even stand upright. And just as I thought it couldn't get any worse, they dropped something. It was a wrench. It clattered against the floor, and I'm telling you, it took every fiber in my being to fight back a scream. If that person bent down to pick the wrench up, they'd definitely see me. With wide eyes, I watched as that person stood still, not picking up the wrench, but not walking away either. It felt like a standoff, where any wrong move could end my life. Eventually, they finally continued walking, and I couldn't see them anymore. I listened as the chaotic footsteps stomped and stumbled around my first floor for what felt like an eternity. And then, finally, the front door opened and shut. They were gone. I stayed hidden under that table for a long time after that. Part of it was fear, but another part of it was what I can only describe as trauma. I just remember being shaken and scared. I was at the ripe age where I understood how dangerous the situation was, but not old enough to know how to deal with it. The rest of the night was kind of a blur. I picked the wrench up off the floor, not wanting my parents to find it the next morning. After making sure the front door was locked, I slunked back upstairs, crawled into bed, and fell asleep. Everything went back to normal after that. For whatever reason, I was terrified to tell my parents. I didn't want them to find out I hadn't locked the doors and done everything they had asked me to do, so I just kept the whole thing to myself. It wasn't until several years later that I told them the story, and it actually took some convincing for them to believe me. Looking back, not telling them the moment it happened was an awful decision, since there was nothing that could have been done about it so far removed from the incident. If I'm being frank, this experience traumatized me for basically the rest of my childhood. I slept with a nightlight from then on, and I developed a fear of the dark that didn't go away for a long time. I still have trouble explaining what happened that night, but I learned my lesson. Lock your doors at night. This happened over the course of 3 or 4 years when I was a kid. I can't remember exactly when I got the first one, but I started having this recurring, half-lucid nightmare maybe once every couple of months. From what I can remember, here's how it would go. I'd be lying down in bed, only the view wasn't from my first-person perspective. Instead, I'd be looking down at myself from the ceiling, like I was viewing my own bedroom through a security camera feed. The out-of-body dissociation always freaked me out. I'd try to float or swim towards my body, but I was never able to move beyond swiveling my head to look around the room. I was half lucid, so I knew it was a dream, but that didn't make me any less scared. After calming myself down, I'd start noticing strange things about my bedroom. For one, the digital clock on my nightstand would always be counting in reverse. That was typically the first strange detail I'd notice. And once I noticed that, I'd start seeing other weird stuff. There were these drawings taped to random spots on the walls and dresser, like crayon drawings you'd expect from a kid my age, but I had no memory of ever making them. I wasn't the type of kid who ever drew much, so it wasn't like I had just forgotten about them. They always showed the same thing, a row of people holding hands, all smiling, with one smaller figure who I can only imagine was me. They were always standing in front of a house with a blue roof, but I can't remember much more about the drawings than that. The other detail about the dreams that still sticks out to me is an old toy train of mine that was always sitting in a different spot on my bedroom floor, which was significant because I had lost that particular toy years prior. Anyway, after analyzing my room for a bit, I'd get this unexplainable urge to look out my bedroom window. I'd glance over, and as if it were on cue, a man would appear just a few inches from the glass. He had short gray hair and what looked like a cut on his left temple. That's honestly all I can remember about his face. He would watch me sleep for a few seconds, then start clawing at the window like he was trying to open it from the outside. That's usually when I woke up. Sometimes I immediately ran to the window, and sometimes I was too terrified to even move. But I always ended up checking one way or another. I don't know what I thought I'd find, maybe claw marks or a smudge from where his hand had been, but there was never anything there, or anyone for that matter. After the fourth time it happened, I finally told my parents. My mom told me that recurring dreams weren't that rare, especially at my age, and my dad chimed in to remind me that they were always just one room away if I ever felt scared. I nodded and acted like that helped, but it didn't. Not really. My dad could tell I was still scared, so he took me by the hand and explored the exterior of the house with me. There was no indication that anyone had been there. No footprints, no smudges on the window, nothing. Even so, that didn't calm my nerves as much as you might think. Keep in mind, this was about 1 year in, so I was having this dream roughly once every 3 months. It wasn't happening every night, not even close, but having the exact same dream 4 times definitely means something, which I knew even at that age. But after that 4th dream though, they just stopped. For a while at least. I went nearly 6 months without a single episode, and at some point, I let myself believe it was over. It all just kind of faded into the background, the way childhood fears tend to when life gets more normal. But then it came back. I have no idea what triggered it, but one random night I had the dream again. Everything was exactly the same as I remembered. The clock, the drawings, the train, everything. But there was something different about that dream that was scaring me twice as much as the earlier ones had. I couldn't figure out what it was. Everything was following the exact same chain of events. But then, as I was looking around the room, I realized what it was. My bedroom window was open. As soon as I saw that, I woke up. There was a period of maybe 5 minutes where I couldn't move, complete and utter sleep paralysis. And it wasn't a passive sleep paralysis either. My brain was screaming at me to check the window the entire time, but I couldn't drag myself out of bed no matter how much I tried. On top of that, I felt significantly colder, as if cold air was blowing through my bedroom window, which I was convinced was wide open. Those 5 minutes were unlike any kind of fear I have ever experienced. All I could think about was how that man was moments away from climbing through my window, yet there was nothing I could do about it. When I finally regained control of my limbs, I forced myself over to the window, confirming that it was locked. I couldn't fall back asleep that night, I was too scared. I'm not sure how I was even able to function the following morning. Another couple of months went by, but I wasn't going to be fooled again. Every night before I went to bed, I thought long and hard about the dream in an attempt to brace myself for having it again. I'm not sure if this logic tracks, but I was hoping that keeping the dream on my brain would help me not get too scared should I have it again. To my surprise, that technique actually worked. The next time I had that dream, I wasn't even half as scared. I didn't even bother checking the window after waking up. By the time I had it again, I was barely scared at all. Still, something about it lingered. Not in a scary way, but enough to make me want to bring it up to my parents again. Maybe it was the way I explained it, or maybe it was because I was slightly older. But for whatever reason, they actually paid closer attention this time. I tried to provide as much detail as possible, something I hadn't done before. As I was getting to my description of the man, my parents' demeanor shifted. Not too dramatically, but enough for me to notice. Specifically, it was right as I was telling them about the cut on his forehead. Before I could even finish, my dad cut me off and asked if I was sure about the cut. I told him I was, and he looked over at my mom like there was some unspoken detail that I wasn't aware of. I asked my parents what was going on, and they assured me that everything was fine. Not wanting to upset them, I didn't inquire further. But from that point on, I started wondering if there was more to the story. As it would turn out, a few days after that conversation, my parents sat me down and came clean. It wasn't some dramatic reveal or anything. They just said there was something they wanted to tell me. My mom did most of the talking. Apparently, when I was really little, like too young to even remember, there was a man named Brian who used to watch me sometimes. They always referred to him as Uncle Brian, but he wasn't actually family, just a close friend of my dad's from college. I guess he was around a lot when I was a baby and a toddler, especially during the times when both my parents were working full-time. But something happened. My dad didn't give details, just said that there was a falling out between them, bad enough that they completely cut ties. He said he forbade Brian from ever coming near our family again, specifically from coming near me again. That was the end of it. I asked what caused the fallout, but they wouldn't tell me. They just repeated that it had nothing to do with me and that I didn't need to worry. The only other thing they told me, and this is what gave me a sick feeling, was that Brian had a noticeable scar on his forehead from a car accident he'd been in years before I was born. They didn't connect the dots out loud, but they didn't have to. I was old enough to make the connection myself. Later that night, after my mom had gone to bed, my dad lingered in the living room with me a little longer. I could tell he wanted to say more, like he hadn't been totally satisfied with how the conversation went earlier. After a few moments of silence, he told me his theory. He said he thought the dreams were my brain's way of processing something buried really deep, some memory from when I was little, before I could even form full sentences. He mentioned how close I apparently used to be with Brian, how I'd cry when he left the house, how I always wanted him to be the one to read me to sleep. My dad said he couldn't think of any other way I'd know about the scar on Brian's forehead. I didn't know what to make of that. I had no recollection of this Brian person whatsoever. Even now, I still can't recall a single memory with him in it. I had no choice but to move on with my life, though, recurring dream or not. Another handful of months passed. I'm doing my best to describe the timeline as accurately as possible, but it's hard to remember exactly how much time passed in between each dream. That said, the frequency decreased after talking to my parents. I had the dream only once or maybe twice within the next year, but things took a very dark turn sometime in year 4. One night after waking up from the dream, I glanced over at my window, just out of habit, and this time, I actually saw something move. It was just a flicker, but I was 100% sure something had just moved from right outside my window, and just like that, all the fear I had spent years trying to prevent came rushing back. It was actually worse. I jumped out of bed and screamed for my parents, who took me very seriously. My dad sprinted outside in his bare feet while my mom held me tightly. Eventually, my dad came back and started whispering stuff to my mom. They told me to stay put while they called the police. I listened to them and stayed in their room. although I don't remember ever hearing any sirens or other voices besides theirs that night. My dad insisted everything was fine and that the police were going to take care of things. The next day, he confessed to me that he had seen what he thought were extremely faint footprints underneath my bedroom window. I asked him if he thought it was Brian, and he said that was impossible, since they had moved and Brian didn't know where we lived. My dad promised me that nothing bad was going to happen ever, and he would turn out to be right. I never had that dream again. My parents don't like talking about this incident, and I can see why. I'm still yet to get a straight answer out of them, but I've since stopped trying. What I can't wrap my head around is the sickening thought that every time I had that dream, there really was someone outside my window watching me. Was it really plausible that someone had been periodically stalking me for 4 years? It doesn't track, and I can't decide what's scarier. If it really was Brian watching me, or just some complete stranger that my brain associated with him for whatever reason. And who knows how that somehow got translated into my dreams. I've done research, and I still don't even know how that would be possible. Maybe he was making a noise or something, and my brain picked up on it. I really can't say. What I can say is that I'm 95% sure my parents never called the police that night. That's something I will likely never get an explanation for. I'll most likely never get any answers regarding this experience since it happened so long ago. But if I do, I'll send an update. This happened a couple of years ago, right before school ended. It was the last day of 8th grade. It was exactly what you'd expect on the final day of middle school. Excitement and bittersweet goodbyes. Everyone was running around, scribbling signatures and cheesy messages in each other's yearbooks. My middle school was huge, easily over 1,000 students, so to keep things manageable, the teachers collected our yearbooks and passed them around to different classrooms, making sure everyone who wanted to got a chance to sign. I'm sure you could see how that could create problems. Anyone who wanted to could write whatever they wanted in anyone's yearbook. The teachers tried their best to prevent things from getting out of hand, but I knew a few kids who wrote some mean messages to people they didn't like. At the end of the day, when I got my yearbook back, I flipped through the pages eagerly, reading all the goofy notes from my friends. But as I scanned the pages, something caught my eye. There was a signature below the face of someone I had never seen before. His name was Samuel Robinson III, a name I'm going to remember for as long as I live. The message he wrote was short, simple, and honestly a bit unsettling. It read, "Hags, I'll be seeing you again." I stared at the page, confused out of my mind. I'd never even spoken a single word to this Samuel kid. It wasn't like there was anything I could do about it, though. The school year was over, so I couldn't see him even if I wanted to. I just chalked it up to some weird kid being weird, or maybe an honest mistake. Either way, I stopped thinking about it. A few hours passed, and before I knew it, I was at home hosting a sleepover in my basement with my best friends Kevin, David, and Kieran. The 4 of us ate Doritos and played Call of Duty all night. My parents' bedroom was 3 floors above us, so we didn't have to worry much about keeping the noise down. We were messing around on my dad's rowing machine sometime just before 2 when we heard a sharp knock at the storm door. The sound instantly silenced us. Who the hell would knock on the storm door? It must have been someone who either didn't want to wake my parents up, or knew we were down there, or both. It didn't make sense. The person kept knocking in the same rhythmic pattern. I could tell Kieran was about to say something, and I couldn't stop him in time. In a loud and assertive voice, he asked who was there. I wanted to knock him out. He had basically broadcasted to whoever was out there that we were down there. My basement doesn't have any external windows, so it was unlikely that they had known we were down there, but now they did. After a long pause and no more knocking, a muffled voice answered back. He said, "Come around to the back door," in a high-pitched voice that genuinely sounded cheerful, like he was a friend of ours trying to join the sleepover. It was definitely a teenager's voice too, and it didn't sound like someone who was pretending to raise their voice either. I was pretty scared, I can't lie. My friends were seemingly unfazed though, like they thought it was somehow exciting that some random kid was outside my house. They insisted that I at least check it out, and even though I didn't want to, they pressured me into it. We crept upstairs, careful not to make too much noise. I approached the back door slowly, trying to ignore the pounding in my chest. Through the narrow glass pane beside it, I could see a shadowy figure standing under the dim light. I got a little closer, and his face came into view. My jaw nearly hit the floor when I realized who it was. It was him. It was that kid Samuel Robinson III who had signed my yearbook. My friends went to go open the door, God knows why, but I stopped them, saying I knew who it was. I explained to them what had happened, and that changed their mood a bit. Keep in mind, Sam was still standing outside while we were talking, and he could definitely see in at us. He must have noticed how freaked out I was, because he started motioning to the side of the house like he wanted me to go over to the window. You might be wondering why none of us were taking the situation more seriously. I honestly think it was because it wasn't like some older, strange man was harassing us. It was a kid from our own school. Still, I wasn't opening the door for him. Instead, I went over to my kitchen window and cracked it open just a tiny bit. My friends followed me and stood a little off to the side. He walked over to the window and I asked him what he wanted, telling him I recognized him from our yearbook. He said, "Oh, so you got my message," and introduced himself as Sam. Then he went on to say he always watched me from afar and that we could have been good friends. I agreed with him just so that I wouldn't piss him off, but there was 0% chance I would have been friends with this kid given any circumstances. I didn't want to press him right away, but I had to know, so I asked him how he knew where I lived. He didn't respond, and I didn't know what to say. Before I could de-escalate the situation, David called him a creepy stalker and told him to piss off. Sam's smile disappeared. He tilted his head like he didn't understand what David had just said. Then, just as quickly, his expression twisted into something I can only describe as hatred. He went from passive and honestly kind of friendly to aggressive and angry. He started screaming things at me, how he hated my friends and thought we should all die, how my ex hated me and random stuff he had no right knowing. He reached toward the window and tried to force it open, but I jammed it shut and locked it. He started snarling at the window and banging on it like an animal. He was 2 seconds away from shattering it, I'm telling you. We must have caused quite the commotion because my parents came rushing down the stairs, demanding to know why we had woken them up. That's when Sam ran away. I told my parents what happened as quickly as I could, and my dad raced outside in his underwear. He came back a few minutes later, saying he had no idea where the kid went. I'm not sure why, but my parents didn't call the police. They just told us to go back to sleep and they deal with the school the following morning, just to give the kid the benefit of the doubt. The next morning, they contacted the school. That's when we learned the disturbing truth. Sam had been expelled a few weeks before the year finished, and he shouldn't have ever been at the school on the last day. Apparently, the yearbooks were printed before his expulsion, which explained why his picture was still included. That meant he had snuck into the school somehow just to write me that message, which freaked me out beyond belief. Despite working with the school to find out more, nobody could track Sam down. It was like he and his parents didn't exist. The whole thing was a pretty big deal, but the school did what they could to keep things under wraps. To this day, I still have no idea how he knew where I lived. That's what freaks me out the most. The running theory is that he was a mentally challenged and troubled young boy who took a strange liking to me for whatever reason, and then he stalked me for who knows how long. My parents were worried for weeks. It's something we don't talk about anymore because it's just uncomfortable, but living in that same house has never felt the same ever since. This happened a decent while ago, back when I was 22. Enough years have passed to the point where I feel safe talking about it. I was fresh out of college with a desirable job and minimal expenses since I was living in my childhood home with my parents. Imagine that, racking up considerable savings without having to worry about food or a place to sleep, and all the while having full access to the room I grew up in, my car, and all my hometown comforts. It's safe to say I was living in pure bliss. Believe me, I knew how lucky I was to have parents who allowed me to stay at home and rent free. I know a lot of people don't have that option, so it's something I never took for granted, but not everything was as stress-free as you might think. What I'm about to tell you happened not even 1 month into my time back at home. I've never been what people my age like to call a party girl. I don't drink excessive amounts of alcohol, I don't spend every ounce of my free time at clubs, and I definitely don't allow men to dictate my life in any way. That's just how I was raised. My father is the most important man in my life, and hookup culture disgusts me. Because of all that, my life is pretty routine. Wake up, satisfy my caffeine addiction, go to work, go to the gym, read a bit of my book at home, mess around on my phone, and go to sleep. Weekends are for hiking, mini road trips, board games, and whatever else I decide I want to spend my time doing. But one random weekend, my closest friend from college, Lindsay, invited me and our other two friends, Sabrina and Thea, to spend a few days at her family's beach house. I'd never been, but from the way Lindsay talked about it, the place sounded like a dream. Quiet, tucked away from the touristy chaos on its own private beach, and just a short walk from the water. To put it bluntly, Lindsay's family is loaded. I think both her parents were neurosurgeons, so I had a feeling her beach house would be insane, and I was far from disappointed. When I first laid eyes on it, I was awestruck. Look, I'm no architect, but I know a modern style house when I see one, and Lindsay's must have been ultra modern because it looked more like a covert military safe house than a personal home. I'd love to show you guys pictures of it, believe me, I've got plenty, but out of respect for Lindsay's family, I think that would be in really poor taste, even if what I'm about to tell you didn't happen. The four of us unloaded our stuff and decided where we'd be sleeping. Lindsay obviously had enough individual bedrooms for all of us to occupy, but what would be the fun in that? Instead, the four of us stayed in the same room, one of the kids' bedrooms that had 2 sets of bunk beds and its own attached bathroom. We'd been staying there 3 nights, which, in my opinion, is the perfect amount of time to spend coupled up with anyone other than your family. I tend to be relatively irritable, so anyone who's not clean or polite tends to tick me off pretty easily. Not that any of my friends are, but you know how it is. I know I told you about my relatively boring lifestyle already, but if there was a time to drink, it was that weekend with my friends, so I definitely planned on letting loose a little more than I ordinarily would. We wanted to keep the first night pretty chill though, so we walked down to the private beach connected to the house and sat in the sand, stargazing. The four of us were drinking White Claws and listening to house music on Sabrina's speaker when we noticed something in the distance. It was this faint, flickering light emanating from somewhere further down the shore. The four of us quieted down a bit and watched the light flicker on and off. The sight was kind of hypnotic, as eerie as it was. After a while, it became clear that the light was swinging back and forth, like a handheld flashlight someone was walking with. And soon after, we realized that's just what it was. It looked like 3 or 4 people casually walking in our direction, not running or stumbling or moving strangely, but strolling at a leisurely pace. As they got closer, we started hearing the sound of laughter, which caused all of us to relax a bit. Considering how late it was most likely just a group of teenagers or even people our age. They must have noticed us because at some point, one of them yelled out hi in a friendly voice. It was a guy's voice, and he sounded around our age. Thea yelled back, and we made some small talk while they made their way over to us. As they approached, we could see that it was a group of 3 guys who looked maybe a year or 2 older than we were. They all had that typical beach boy look, which I could tell right away my friends were digging, especially Thea. She's a bit crazy when it comes to guys, so I can't say I was too surprised. She knows how I feel about her lifestyle, so it's not like I'm saying anything crazy. To be fair, she is drop-dead gorgeous, and I've never seen a guy not take a liking to her. The guys sat down with their beers, and the 7 of us continued drinking. It was actually a really great time. The guys weren't overtly flirtatious, but they weren't boring either. Fast forward an hour and several drinks later, and they ultimately invited us back to their place. Personally, I was exhausted and was leaning towards going to sleep, but I could tell all 3 of my friends wanted to continue hanging out with the boys, especially Thea, of course. I decided not to spoil everyone's fun and called it a night for myself, telling my friends to go on without me. There were only 3 guys after all, and I had no intention of hooking up with anyone that night. I walked back towards Lindsay's house while the 6 of them walked along the beach, presumably towards wherever the guys were staying. I washed up and went to bed. Sometime after 3 in the morning, I woke up to a FaceTime call from Lindsay, which was confusing since she should have either been home by then or asleep next to one of the guys. I answered her in a groggy voice, and what she said woke me up instantly. She basically screamed into the phone that Thea and Sabrina had been kidnapped and I needed to get her car immediately. Her words were like a bucket of ice-cold water being splashed across my face. I've never felt a more intense sense of fear and adrenaline. I didn't waste a second. My hands were literally shaking as I quickly threw on some clothes and sprinted down the stairs. I asked her why she had called me instead of the police, and she reassured me that she already had. She told me to stay on the line as she walked me through it. With her instruction, I managed to open the driveway gate, find her car keys, and speed out of there in a matter of minutes. She told me they were about 10 houses down the beach to the left, so that's where I started driving. She described the car and told me what direction it had gone in, and I slammed on the gas to try and catch up. There wasn't a single car on the road, and I was driving at an insanely unsafe speed. It was a miracle I didn't get pulled over. After a few minutes of driving, I noticed a car matching Lindsay's description driving slowly in the distance. Then I hung up the phone, called the police, and told them exactly where we were. The dispatcher told me to keep my distance so as not to alert them to the situation, so that's what I did. After what felt like forever, I spotted cop lights up ahead. The car ahead of me didn't try to evade the police. I can only imagine that they assumed it was an unrelated stop. I pulled the car over and watched everything unfold. It was pure chaos. The cops forcibly removed all 3 men from the SUV at gunpoint. They put them in cuffs and escorted them back to one of the cruisers. Then, one of the officers walked over to the trunk of the car and pulled it open to reveal both Thea and Sabrina, bound and, from the looks of it, pretty badly bruised. As horrifying as the whole experience was, it was nothing compared to the sequence of events told from their perspective. All 3 of them were comfortable with me writing this, by the way. We're still close in contact, so I obviously asked them. But none of them wanted to write it themselves, and for good reason. To keep things short, after I went to bed, they all continued drinking. Lindsay is the only one who remembers things clearly, since she was trying to be at least a little responsible given it was her family's house we were staying in. At some point, the guys Thea and Sabrina were with suggested they all go to bed. So the 4 of them split off while Lindsay told the 3rd guy she was going home. He was really upset about that, which Lindsay initially thought was because he wanted to get with her. She told him she would have been down but had to watch her house, and he got angry. They yelled at each other for a bit, and he ended up telling Lindsay to get the hell out of his house and never come back, which she was more than happy doing. Halfway home though, she realized she had forgotten her purse, so she went back to get it. That's when she saw the guys throwing Thea and Sabrina into the back of the car before driving off. She called the police, then me, and that was that. Thea's parents are both lawyers, and they jumped through dozens of hoops to do 2 things: keep the event as far away from the public sphere as possible, and make sure those guys got maximum prison sentences. They accomplished both. Turns out the house they were staying in didn't even belong to them. It was owned by some random old couple who were on vacation in a different country. That, plus the slew of other crimes they were charged with, put them away for a long time. Although I still think there's no sentence long enough that can properly compensate for what they did. As much as I hate admitting it, this traumatized me for years. I couldn't do beaches, late nights, or talking to strangers, no matter how harmless they seemed, or how safe a situation felt. I became antisocial and drifted away from the girls for a little, but luckily that's since changed. I can't even begin to imagine how this incident affected Thea and Sabrina. Part of me feels like not remembering anything is a blessing in disguise. I think the craziest part about the whole thing is the fact that had I not gone home, I might not have been able to reach Lindsay's car in time. And had it not been for that, the police may have never found those guys' car. This happened just last year. My buddy Jimmy is pretty involved and well connected within the music community. By music community, I'm more specifically referring to the dance/electronic music scene all along the East Coast, predominantly New Jersey and New York. It's actually pretty impressive what he and his team have been able to accomplish in just 2 years. The general gist is this: their company hosts what they call events at high-profile venues, typically the most well-known club or party space in whatever city they happen to be in. Then they outsource the talent, which, mind you, is typically a very well-known and sometimes borderline famous DJ. I'm not too involved or invested in that scene, so I'm not exactly sure who they've gotten to perform, but I will tell you that there have been some huge names in the mix. But enough context. Jimmy and I go way back. I'm talking 20 plus years. I've basically known him my entire life, and he's been my best friend for damn near most of it. Because of that, he lets me, along with a bunch of our other hometown friends, come to his shows for free and hang out with the talent in the VIP section. It's actually really cool and something I wish I expressed my gratitude for more often. Jimmy was scheduled to host a huge event the weekend of July 4th on the Jersey Shore. It was going to be their biggest one yet, and all our mutual friends were going. Jimmy invited me to come down early with him, and I obviously obliged. The two of us made the hour-and-a-half drive with our other friend Ryan, and we found ourselves at the venue a good 4 hours before the doors opened. Ryan and I didn't have much to do while Jimmy and his team set up, so we decided to get a bit of a head start on the alcohol consumption. Jimmy and his team were entitled to as much free booze as they desired, compliments of the venue, and Ryan and I definitely took advantage of that. By the time the first DJ started his set, Ryan and I were more than a little buzzed, to put it mildly. It was 4th of July weekend after all, so we felt like our degenerate activities were justified. Fast forward a couple hours, and Ryan and I were completely wasted. I honestly don't remember a time since then when I was that drunk, not even close. Don't get me wrong, Ryan and I are grown men and we can handle our alcohol. Throwing up, making fools of ourselves wasn't the issue though. It was genuinely just the problem of having lower impulse control and worse decision making. But either way, we were having a great time, at least from what I can remember. The event was winding down, and it was getting to that point in the night where you either figured out how you were getting home or who you were going home with, or both. Jimmy had rented an Airbnb really close by and promised both Ryan and I a bed, so the first issue wasn't a concern. The second problem, though, that was what was on my mind. The two of us danced over to the bar and started talking to some girls we found attractive, and before long, we had figured out who we were going to spend the rest of the night with. Neither of us are Calvin Klein models, but we're both above 6 feet tall. For whatever reason, the vast majority of guys who hang around the Jersey Shore are usually shorter than average, so being tall is an even bigger boost than it usually is. And for whatever reason, that seems to be the main attribute most girls on the Jersey Shore seek out. Not looks, not build, not intelligence, but height. Don't ask me why. The Jerseyan female mind is still something I have yet to comprehend. I'm probably botching their names, but I'm fairly sure the two girls introduced themselves as Gianna and Marcela. Us meeting them coincides with where my ability to recall events precisely becomes a bit hazy, so there may be gaps in the story from here on out. From what I can remember, it was actually Marcela who suggested we all leave together and continue to party elsewhere, which Ryan and I weren't going to argue with. Gianna handed the two of us a drink and insisted that we get on their level before heading out, even though we had both probably consumed the fluid equivalent of her body weight in alcohol already. I know that whole dynamic. Girls getting guys drinks sounds a little unorthodox, and it is, but these girls were clearly wealthy given how they were dressed. After downing the drinks, the four of us started moving towards the venue's exit. The moment we stepped outside, Marcela suggested we go back to her place, which was pretty close by, and also right on the beach. Her saying that actually surprised me a little. I was fully anticipating going back to our Airbnb, considering the guys were usually the ones to host in situations like this. But both girls insisted that Marcela's beach house was definitely nicer than whatever inland Airbnb we found for the night. She had a point, so I didn't argue, and neither did Ryan. We walked along the beach, talking the whole time. The girls seemed really intelligent and knowledgeable based on the conversations we had, and I remember finding it so refreshing to talk about something other than nightlife and whatever other garbage I'm used to talking to girls about for once. Not just girls, drunk people in general. At one point, I actually felt kind of embarrassed for being so drunk because I felt like I couldn't articulate myself well enough and looked like an idiot. That's when I realized I actually was feeling drunker than I had been 15 minutes earlier. But it wasn't a drunk I was used to feeling. I felt like my body was melting under my weight, as if I were going to collapse uncontrollably any second. My legs felt flimsy, almost like cardboard, if that makes any sense. Moving my limbs, mouth, and even my eyes became increasingly more difficult, and there was a moment where my extremities started feeling a little numb. But then, just as quickly as the feeling arose, it passed, back to normal drunkenness, at least for the time being. Just then, we arrived at the beach house. It was insane. I'm probably exaggerating because I was so drunk, but it looked like what I imagined a professional athlete's beach house to look like. We went inside, and after taking our shoes off, Found ourselves in what I'm guessing was a living room. I say guessing because the level of opulence in there was just so foreign to anything I'm used to. It was decorative, but somehow minimalistic. Even those descriptions are opposite. There were honest-to-God sculptures on pedestals in there, but it didn't feel cluttered or overly showy, and everything on display seemed to blend right into the walls like they were just extensions of the room. I wish I had the wherewithal to take a picture, but again, my mind was elsewhere. Evidently, so was Ryan's, because not 15 minutes after stepping foot in the house, he and Marcela had disappeared somewhere in that maze of a house, which left me alone with Gianna. She leaned in to kiss me, and that's the last thing I remember before blacking out. Not her kissing me, but leaning in to kiss me. That's where everything cuts off. I don't remember feeling woozy again or drinking more or doing anything else, but there's a huge gap in my memory that spans several hours and will not come back no matter what I try. And the thing is, I know I didn't pass out because there are texts on my phone sent from me proving I was still conscious. There's digital proof that I was sentient, but I don't remember one bit of it. And before you say I just simply blacked out from alcohol, this was different. I rarely ever black out, but all the times I have, I can still remember bits and pieces of the night, scattered moments here and there, enough for me to string together a continuous sequence of events at the very least. Keep in mind, those were also all times where I was drunker than I was that night, so that's another reason I think a generic blackout isn't a reasonable explanation for what happened. Plus, Ryan experienced the exact same thing at essentially the exact same time, which is way too specific to be coincidental. Here's the next thing I remember. Waking up with the sun directly overhead, in a random set of bushes over an hour away from where the event was. Something I didn't know yet because my phone wasn't in my pocket. In fact, nothing was in my pocket at all. Both my wallet and keys were gone, but it gets worse. It wasn't even my pocket to begin with. I was wearing someone else's clothes, and not Ryan's either, a complete stranger's. The only personal belonging of mine I still had in my possession was my shoes, and even those were messed up. Both shoes had the shoelaces removed and were soaking wet. My head was pounding, and everything felt disoriented, like I was waking up from anesthesia. I didn't even sit up right away. I just stared at the sky for a minute, trying to make sense of where I was. Bushes, someone else's clothes, no wallet, no phone, no keys. Based on my shoes, it was like I had been in the water recently, but it didn't smell like salt water or chlorine. The worst part about the whole thing was the blankness. I genuinely couldn't remember anything past Gianna leaving, like I already said. That's when the panic started to creep in. I wasn't just hungover, I was scared. I had no idea how I got there. What if I'd gotten into a fight or crashed a car? What if someone drugged me? I didn't have a single point of reference for the last 10 hours. I stood up and realized there wasn't a single landmark around me. It didn't look like a beach town, which also scared me. The road ahead just curved into more trees, but just across the street, maybe a few hundred feet away, was a 7-Eleven. It was genuinely the only thing in sight, so I headed straight for it. I asked the guy behind the counter if I could use his phone, telling him that mine had been stolen. He stared at me for a second, probably debating whether or not I was trying to scam him, but then he slid it across the counter. The first number that came to my mind was my sister's. It was the only number besides my mom or dad's I still memorized, and there was no way in hell I was calling my parents. My sister picked up right away, and I tried explaining things the best I could. She ended up giving me Ryan's number, which I ended up calling several times, but to no avail. That's when I started wondering if what had happened to me happened to him too. Drugged, robbed, dumped in some random bushes an hour away. I was just about to call the police, when what do you know, Ryan walks into the same 7-Eleven. We just stared at each other for a second before dabbing each other up. He then told me his version of things, and you guessed it, it was the same story, damn near exactly. That sealed it for us. We called the police, making sure to thank the 7-Eleven worker profusely. Fast forward a few minutes, and we're now recounting our story to the police outside the store. To their credit, they took everything we said seriously, at first. But the more we told them, the more their questions started turning. Were we sure we didn't just drink too much? Maybe we wandered off and passed out somewhere. They weren't accusing us outright, but it was clear they weren't entirely convinced something criminal happened. I told them it was unlikely we would have drunkenly wandered into a town an hour away by foot, and I don't think they liked that remark very much. I gave them my sister's number and asked them to call her. She was already tracking my phone through Find My iPhone. To all of our collective surprise, my phone was showing up in the middle of a parking lot a few minutes drive away. The officers agreed to drive us, and sure enough, both our phones were sitting on the pavement next to each other. While it was great to have my phone back, that only affirmed the police's theory that we had just been drunk. They started saying that we probably hadn't even been robbed, that we had lost our wallets the same way we had lost our phones. We tried convincing the police to check out the house Marcela brought us to, the one she claimed was hers, but they weren't having it. They told us we were probably just too drunk and didn't remember things correctly. One of them even said, "Happens more than you think." Then they gave us their cards and told us to call if we remembered anything else. It was actually shocking how reluctant they were to even connect us to other officers that would be willing to help. They told us to find a ride home since our phones were still charged, and they just left us there. After they left, I went through my phone for the first time, and things got even weirder. There were texts sent from me to a ton of people I knew. Jimmy, my parents, a few coworkers, even some girls I had been talking to. All normal sounding stuff I might have said if I had actually had a calm, coherent night. The texts genuinely sounded like me, but from a continuity standpoint, they didn't make any sense when considered all together. One message to Jimmy thanked him for the event and said we'd crashed at a buddy's place. One to my dad said we were safe and had found a couch to sleep on. There was another to a girl I'd been texting that just said something casual, like I was hanging out at home and thinking about her. None of those texts made any sense, and mostly contradicted each other. I realized I had a ton of missed calls and texts from Jimmy, so I called him. He sounded relieved to hear from me, saying he thought Ryan and I had died or something. He told us to stay put, he'd come pick us up. In the meantime, Ryan and I canceled all our cards, but interestingly, none of them had been used, despite the likely fact that they had been in those girls' possession for several hours. The entire ride home, we talked non-stop about what could have happened. None of it made any sense. Yeah, we had been drugged, that much was clear, but that didn't explain things. First of all, I don't know of any kind of roofie that has those effects, like an induced blackout. Everything I've read just said those drugs make you fall asleep, but again, I was conscious, as the texts confirm. Plus, why go to such lengths just to rob two random guys? Especially if you weren't going to at least even attempt to use their credit cards. Two guys who walked up to you, no less. And in such a risky place, too, your own house. Or was it a house they had broken into? Both were equally risky. Jimmy thought we had been targeted, but like I just said, we had been the ones to approach the girls, so we couldn't have been targeted. And all this isn't even mentioning how or why we miraculously found ourselves in a random town an hour away wearing other people's clothing. As crazy as it sounds, both Ryan and I checked ourselves for incisions, thinking maybe some of our organs had been harvested, but there was nothing. Jimmy suggested that maybe they had just given us some exotic drugs, which I guess makes sense, but someone had driven us to that town, and someone other than those girls had switched clothes with us. We never got an answer, but it's not like we just forgot about the whole thing. Ryan and I ended up driving all the way back to the shore just to go looking for that house. We tried our best to retrace our steps, knowing that if we just walked along the boardwalk, we'd eventually find the house, since it was on the beach. And we actually did find it. The two of us walked up the walkway and rang the doorbell. An older man opened the door, asking us what we wanted. I did the talking. Not wanting to reveal too much or potentially incriminate myself, I simply asked him if a girl named Marcela lived here, or if he had a daughter or granddaughter around our age. He gave me a hard no, and I made up some BS story that there was a girl who lied about owning this house, which he actually found pretty funny. Then that was that. I would be lying if I said I didn't walk away from that house with a sick, unsettling feeling in my stomach. I can't even describe it as fear, just a sickening discomfort, like something truly awful had happened to me and my friend that night, and I'd never get to the bottom of it. For a long time after that, I was convinced those girls had been involved in something much, much bigger that neither me nor Ryan could even conceive. That maybe they had been planning to kidnap or kill us, and decided not to go through with it at the last second for whatever reason. I know I'll never have an update, but if something else happens, I'll definitely send something. This video was captured by a Reddit user's doorbell camera. He claims to have woken up to his dog going crazy outside, followed by a notification from the app Ring, saying motion was detected at his door. Upon opening the app, he's greeted to nothing but an eyeball looking directly into his camera, and a man whispering and mumbling to himself. He proceeds to knock and ring the doorbell. He then begins trying his luck at the doorknob and window, all the while still mumbling and whispering to himself. After the homeowner threatens to call the police, the man gets defensive and claims he was just looking for his dog, conveniently named Fido.
Okay, I was just looking for my dog, Fido. Whoa, you don't have to get all like that and stuff, honey. You know, we could be friends.
In this video, we see a man seemingly waiting to be let into a house. Whether it's his house or not is unknown. As he waits by the door, a strange animal-like transparent figure can be seen floating towards the door, and as it reaches and passes the man, he turns, possibly reacting to a sound he may have heard. These are two clips that were likely taken back during the entire clown epidemic of 2016. In this first clip, we see someone dressed as a clown wielding a small sword, lurking around by the front door for a bit and running off after ringing the doorbell. Similarly, in this next clip, someone dressed as a clown can be seen standing in the distance, looking at the front door. After a while, he approaches the door, seems to stare into the doorbell camera for a few seconds, then walks away. Whether these were pranks meant to scare the homeowners or not, most people wouldn't want to open their doors to these two. In this video, around 2 p.m., the man in the dark hoodie seen here apparently rang the doorbell and no one answered. The man who lives in this house was wearing headphones, therefore couldn't hear the doorbell. So the man in the hoodie likely presumed no one was home, and soon returned with his friend in the white hoodie around 15 minutes later. The man in the dark hoodie attempts to kick in the door while his friend in the white hoodie stands by. The man who owns the house is able to hear the loud bangs of the attempted burglar's foot hitting the door, and he yells out something unintelligible that scares the two men off. In this video, the camera catches a shirtless man approaching the door, but instead of actually ringing the bell or knocking on the door, he pretends to knock on the door. What you can't see on the screen is a car that's waiting for the man in front of the house. According to the homeowner, he could be seen talking to someone waiting in the car off camera later on. It's likely that the shirtless man was forced to do something by the person in the car, clearly something that he doesn't want to do given that he fakes an entire conversation with the homeowner, all the while checking to make sure the person in the car could see him talking.
Okay. Sorry about that. Sorry.
It was apparent he or the person in the car were looking for a person named Matt, who they thought lived in this house. One could only imagine what this man was put out to do to this Matt person. In this video, the doorbell camera detects motion, but seemingly nothing appears in the frame except for a small white orb that floats across the screen. Some paranormal investigators have referred to orbs appearing in pictures and videos from allegedly paranormal sources. Apparently, the orb in this video is significant enough to trip the motion sensors of the camera system. This one isn't a video, but rather a pretty disturbing picture caught by a Redditor's doorbell camera. After being woken up by a notification on their phone, they checked it to see a message saying, "Your doorbell detected a visitor." After checking the app, they didn't see anything, and as anyone would, assumed it was maybe a bug or a small animal that tripped the motion sensor. However, the Redditor received more notifications, and after checking the app again, was faced with this disturbing image. Whether it's even a male or female is almost impossible to tell, but perhaps the most disturbing part of the image is the shape and distance of the person's eyes. It's not something anyone would ever want to see at their front door. In this video, we see someone wearing a mask approaching the door and covering the doorbell with a piece of tape. The homeowner got an alert that motion was detected on the porch, and upon checking the footage was ready to grab his gun. It's not known what was done while the tape was covering the camera, but eventually one side of the tape peeled off, revealing the person in the mask was gone. The homeowner doesn't know if it was simply kids playing a prank or someone who meant him and his family harm. This video shows exactly why you should always check who's outside your door before opening it.
On the doorbell.
This doorbell camera caught two men in front of the house, one of them approaching the front door and ringing the doorbell, armed with a gun. He attempts to hide his face as he approaches the door, then hides off to the side, waiting for someone to open up. The other man walks down the sidewalk, waiting for his friend to do whatever he was about to do, but luckily nobody answered the door. This homeowner's camera captured two suspicious men pull up in their driveway and wait outside their front door. The one on the left quickly notices the camera and the two flee. But not even 15 minutes later, the two pull up into the homeowner's driveway again, having apparently decided they'd go through with the break-in anyway. This time, one of them immediately attempts to kick the door down, but the homeowner is ready this time and speaks through the doorbell speaker, claiming the police are on their way, scaring the two off for good this time. On September 10th, 2018, a Florida man wearing a bulletproof vest and carrying an assault rifle rang his neighbor's doorbell at 4 in the morning. The homeowner grabbed her two children and stayed put in the bathroom. After spotting the man on her security footage, she immediately called the police and her husband, who was out of town for work. Roughly 25 minutes later, the police arrived. The man faced aggravated assault charges. The homeowner said the daughter of the unnamed man had stayed at their home recently, claiming she was afraid of her own father. At some off hour in the night, this man's doorbell camera captures a mysterious, transparent-looking, blurry figure slowly moving down the sidewalk across the street. It closely resembles a human, and that's what most may assume. But the weird part of this one is that after reviewing the footage, the homeowner asked a neighbor who also had a camera to check their footage at the same time, and their footage didn't reveal the figure walking down the sidewalk. This happened when I was a kid, so some of the details are a little fuzzy. I used to bike to school every day, and the route to school took me past this massive cornfield. My parents were always clear about one thing: don't cut through the cornfield. I was biking home like normal when the chain on my bike popped loose. Cutting through the cornfield would save me a ton of time. At first, it was fine, but every so often, I'd look behind me. I started to pick up on a faint rustling sound coming from the corn just a little ways off the path. It stopped, but as soon as I started walking, I heard it again. This time, it was a little louder and a little closer. I turned a corner, and standing right there in the middle of the path was a man. He asked me if I was lost in a low and raspy voice. I dropped my bike and ran as fast as I could. I could hear him crashing through the corn behind me. I truthfully thought I was gonna die.
In 2005, a young woman living in a remote farmhouse who was taking care of her ill elderly grandmother was suddenly awoken from a nap by a loud and crazed screaming. After rushing to her grandmother's room, she saw her cowering under the sheets like a little girl. The young woman, whose name has not been disclosed, shook her grandmother vigorously to get her attention. When the grandmother finally regained composure, she claimed that she saw a red figure standing by the door, one that she could only describe as Satan. The grandmother stated that she has never hallucinated in her life, and that she knows what she saw was real.
A 67-year-old retired teacher came to the hospital claiming that she had visions of odd-looking faces hovering over her. But she wasn't going crazy, and laboratory tests also ruled out two common culprits of hallucination: infection and drug interactions. In fact, the patient and her family were so concerned in the days before she came to the hospital, they asked a priest about performing an exorcism. The woman drew a picture of what she saw. The faces had large teeth, eyes and ears, and a horizontally elongated shape like a football. It was determined that the woman had a condition called Charles Bonnet syndrome. Patients with the syndrome may see small people and animals, bright moving shapes, or distorted faces. These hallucinations are purely visual. No sounds accompany them.
In 1995, a man named Toma Cariata had just recently lost his mother to cancer. He locked himself in his bedroom for days, completely depressed and devastated. One night, he woke up to the sound of the wooden floor cracking as if pressure was being placed on it. He looked up and saw his mother standing by the doorway watching him. His screams were so loud that his neighbors called the police, who were the ones who got this information off of him. Doctors found nothing wrong with him that would normally cause for hallucinations. As far as anybody knows, he hasn't seen her since.
This happened when I was really little and I lived alone with my single mum. She always came to check on me every night when she would get up to go to the bathroom. This one night in particular, I remember waking up thinking I heard something in my closet. I looked up and my mum was at the foot of my bed, giving me a playful wave. She told me to go back to sleep. She then went into my closet and pulled the door until it was just barely open. And she just stood in there, poking her head through the crack of the barely open closet. I remember vividly seeing her eye peeking through the crack at me. I laughed like any little kid would do in that situation, and then fell asleep moments later. When I was eating cereal the next morning, I asked my mum why she was hiding in the closet last night, and she just stopped and gave me a puzzled and concerned look. She told me she hadn't been in the room all night. At first, she assumed somebody had broken into the house, but she soon realised it was some kind of hallucination or dream. Since this experience, I have only had 2 other hallucinations, neither of them as vivid or as creepy as this one.
I used to be a trucker and would do a lot of late night runs. I usually had my coffee to keep me going through the night, and even then it would still be tough. This night, however, I didn't have my coffee, and things weren't going so well. On several occasions, I almost fell asleep behind the wheel, and I was only just barely able to save myself from completely drifting away by actually feeling the truck drifting off to the side of the road. Then, just as I thought I was regaining my awareness, I saw a black figure coming up in the road, right in the path of the truck. I swerved away to avoid the figure and just barely missed it. I had to come to a complete stop to try and gather my sanity back up. I looked in the left rearview mirror. The figure was still standing in the middle of the road. I am not usually a person to confront things in any situation, but something possessed me to get out of that truck and give the person a piece of my mind. But when I got out of the truck, there was nobody there. I was seemingly the only person on this road for miles. I took off after that, and about 5 miles down the road, I pulled over and fell asleep. I think my mind was playing tricks on me that night, but I don't know why my brain would create such an eerie image.
I was 13 years old. I never really had sleeping problems. I was actually a really heavy sleeper. It happened on a Saturday morning. I went to bed late the previous night. When I woke up, or kind of woke up, I couldn't move at all. The only thing I could control were my eyes, and when I moved my eyes to focus on the corner of the room, I saw the most horrifying thing I had ever witnessed in my life. There was a man, probably about 8 feet tall, with a cut open mouth, dripping blood, made to look like a smile, and in the man's hand was a large carving knife. My biggest fear came true as the man started hovering towards me, not walking, not even moving a single limb, just hovering over to me like a ghost. I tried to scream or move or anything, but I was paralyzed to my bed. The man reached the edge of my bed, inches away from my face, and for the first time, he moved his arm up, the arm with the knife. He raised the knife up to the ceiling, and I knew what was going to happen next. I closed my eyes, the only thing I could physically do, and waited for it to happen. But as I lay there for probably 30 seconds unharmed, I opened my eyes back up. The man was gone, and then I realised I could move. I got out of bed and ran to explain what happened to my parents. They immediately seemed to understand and explained that I had just experienced sleep paralysis. I don't know why I hallucinated something so horrific, but the fear was genuine, and I can still remember the man's face today.
Being a single mother and having to work 2 jobs, I always have to hire a sitter to watch my 3-year-old son. I have a long drive from my second job, and on a few occasions I've almost fallen asleep behind the wheel from exhaustion. There was one night that I felt myself starting to doze off, so I tried pinching myself and shaking my head and doing anything to wake myself up. There were no lights at all on this highway, which made it even worse. And then I heard a giggling sound coming from behind me. I looked in the mirror and saw my 3-year-old looking at me in the back seat. I slammed on the brakes and looked at the back seats to find them empty. 10 seconds later, I got a phone call from the sitter telling me that he had fallen down the stairs and broke his ankle. I was fully awake after that and sped home. To this day, I still believe because of this that mothers have some kind of sixth sense when it comes to their children.
This is the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. I live in the country, but not a desolate area. I had a decent amount of neighbours that were close enough, There was still woods in all directions though. I was home alone as usual one late night when I heard a legit scream coming out in the woods. I went outside into my backyard with a flashlight just to take a look through the trees. This was late and nobody was still up, and all the lights were out. Shining the light through the trees, I froze when the light landed on a tall figure, probably twice as tall as me, and it had some kind of long trunk hanging from its face that went down to its waist, almost like an elephant. It was moving in some kind of creepy march in my direction. All that I could see from it was blackness. There was no colour to it. I walked backwards into my house and slid the door shut, still looking in the direction of the thing, but it was gone. It completely vanished from sight. I still sincerely hope what I saw and heard was just in my head.
You can see some weird things when you're tired, but the thing about this story, I wasn't tired. Me and the family were on vacation to some resort in a very rural area of Pennsylvania to make the setting creepier. There weren't many young people there for me and my brothers to hang out with. It seemed like more of an adult resort. But then one day when I was walking outside of the main lodge of the resort, I for some reason looked up to a window on the second floor and saw a teenage girl looking down at me. From that distance, she looked kinda cute, so I gave her a wave, but she didn't show any sign of reaction, so I just moved on. However, later that same day, I was so bored that I was sitting on the swing set at the little playground of the resort, and that's when I saw the same girl again. She was a little ways away from me down past the playground, close to the tree line, and she was just standing there staring at me. Being a teenage guy, my hormones controlled my body, and so I got off the swing and began walking over to her. As I started getting closer to her, I realized she wasn't as cute as I thought she was. There was something about her face that just gave off a creepy vibe. I can't put my finger on it, but if I had to say, I think it would have to do with her eyes and her mouth. I'd say once I got about halfway over to her, she turned around completely and ran into the woods. And I mean she full on ran into the woods. I stopped in my tracks, completely turned off. This girl seemed like a freaky stalker. I didn't see her the rest of our stay at the resort. During the car ride home, miles and miles away from the resort, I was thinking about her. How maybe if I followed her into the woods I could have gotten laid, even though there was something off about her face. But then what I saw next made me feel like my heart dropped into my stomach. Looking down ahead, I saw the same girl standing by the tree line on the side of the highway. As we sped past her, I saw her head turn so that she was always looking right at me, even through the tinted minivan windows. I asked my parents if they saw her, and they just responded, "Saw who?" Soon afterwards, I accepted that it was all in my head, and that the girl was never even there.
I can tell you from experience that sleep paralysis is the scariest thing you can go through. I was 19 at the time, and unlike most other people, I had experienced sleep paralysis 3 times in my life. But on one horrible night, it happened a 4th time, and it was much worse than any other time, or anything in my life for that matter. I opened up my eyes just as the morning sun began to peek its light into my somewhat opened blinds, but I found myself unable to move. It's already a hellish experience enough, but what I saw only made it an emotionally scarring experience. There was a little girl standing by the wall staring me down. At least I assume she was, because her eyes were nothing but black. Anyone's neutral response would be to jerk up and scream or attack, but I couldn't do anything. The girl then started taking giant exaggerated steps, stretching her legs more than humanly possible. She reached my bed and stopped And finally she threw her hands around my throat and squeezed. And I couldn't breathe. She was choking me, and in reality, I could not breathe. I thought I was going to die. And I couldn't do anything about it. I was completely helpless. And then, just as I felt as if I were taking my final gasps, my hands jerked up and I hit myself in the face. The girl was gone, and I was fully awake. I felt like I had been underwater for a whole minute, gasping for air. I had been genuinely cut off from breathing in air, but that wasn't even the scariest part. What I find the most terrifying, and you can only understand if you've experienced something like this yourself, was watching that little girl with her hands around my throat, choking me almost to death, and just sitting there, watching and feeling it, unable to do anything.
With police being in the front lines of investigating everything out of the ordinary, it's no surprise they'll come across some disturbing things. Some of the findings on this list are weird, some shocking, and some just disturbing. So, here are 6 disturbing police discoveries. Number 6. In Glen Rose, Texas, neighbors of Tasha Chantel Hatcher noticed her acting odd and immediately notified police. And it's a good thing they did, as the police found something completely unexpected and horrifying inside of her oven. Now, Tasha and her neighbors lived in a relatively peaceful area. However, one day when some of Tasha's neighbors noticed her acting a bit nervous and blasting music, they knew something was wrong and thought it would be best to get the police to investigate her house. Tasha is a single mother of a 2-year-old girl named Nevaeh. Tasha always seemed like a playful and caring mother, which made this whole situation just more shocking. When the cops arrived, they found Tasha's daughter inside of the oven, which had been turned on. Tasha admitted to willfully doing this, and as a result of her actions, her daughter suffered 2nd and 3rd degree burns and was hospitalized. She has since been put under foster care. Tasha has been charged with serious bodily harm to a child. She is currently being held on a $300,000 bond. Number 5. In 1969, 3 people riding in a 1950 Chevy were reported missing and were never found. Only a year later, 3 teenagers riding in a 1969 Camaro were also reported missing. For more than 45 years, their location had remained a mystery until just recently when all 6 of them were found inside both cars at the bottom of Foss Lake in Oklahoma. Jimmy Williams, Lee Johnson, and Michael Rios went missing while on their way to a football game. This was on November 20th, 1970. The Camaro, belonging to Jimmy Williams, was found at the bottom of Foss Lake by police divers who were actually in the middle of a training exercise. But that wasn't all they found. They also discovered a second car in the lake, which also had 3 bodies inside. The bodies were identified as 69-year-old John Alva Porter, who was the driver, and his friends Nora Duncan and Cleburne Hammock. They had been missing for more than 50 years. The circumstances of these deaths are still not fully known, but the police believe foul play to be the most logical explanation. It's believed that it's just too much of a coincidence that 2 nights out so long ago that happened just within a year ended in such an eerily similar fashion. It will likely never be known just what happened all those years ago. Number 4. In December of 2015, Russian officers found 37 unmarked sacks stuffed with sawdust sitting on railway cars. At first glance, the mysterious bags just seemed to contain wood shavings. However, the officers discovered that hidden inside of the bags were hundreds of severed bear parts which smugglers intended to sell on the black market. Police confiscated 527 bear feet, a bear muzzle, bear gallbladders, and 3 musk deer glands. The body parts were destined for Asia, where they would be used for medicine. In fact, Asia is responsible for the poaching of a lot of animals. They hold beliefs that many animal parts, for example ivory and tusks, can cure diseases such as cancer. A disappointing statistic has shown that bears in the past few years have been becoming a much bigger target to poaching. Number 3. During Halloween night of 2015 in Slingerlands, New York, police discovered that 2 Halloween decorations were not what they seemed. Police were cruising Veeder Road in a rather wealthy area when they coincidentally received a call from a resident on the same road telling them that they saw 2 dead body decorations hanging on their front tree. The creepy part was that they didn't hang anything on their front tree. Police arrived within minutes and saw exactly what the woman was talking about, but upon closer inspection, realized these were not decorations at all, but rather 2 real decomposed bodies. The woman recalled 2 men who were suspiciously walking around out front in her house about an hour earlier, though she couldn't give any worthwhile details about the 2 men. It's unknown if these 2 men the woman mentioned were responsible for this, who these dead bodies belonged to, if and why these 2 men killed them, and why they targeted her house. Number 2. In 2014, there was a Reddit post asking people about their scariest experiences as a police officer. A Redditor whose account has since been deleted replied to the post, explaining a situation he and his partner for the night had encountered. There was a call to inspect an air vent at an elderly woman's house, as she suspected there had been an animal or something up there, as a large part of the vent in the living room was caving down as if something were in there. She had just gotten back from a vacation that day with her daughter to find this. It was a slow night and they were the closest to the house, so they were instructed to check it out. Stepping into the house, they could immediately smell a foul odor filling the air in the house, an odor the old woman said she couldn't smell. The old woman showed the officers the specific air vent where she saw the bulge. The vent cover was very large and old-fashioned. It had 4 big screws that kept the cover on. The smell was most unbearable by this vent. The cops knew something was dead inside of there. They undid the screws and shined a light into the vents. They were disturbed not to see a dead raccoon or something they were expecting, but rather a dead person. They had a hard time dragging the body out as it was stuck in the narrow duct, but they were soon able to get him out and identify him. He was a bald black man, mid-40s, wearing an unzipped black hoodie with a stained undershirt underneath, denim jeans, and brown work boots. He had a knife tightly gripped in his stiff fingers, which the cops assumed was meant to harm the old woman. This duct led to an air vent outside, which is how the man was able to break in the first place. The author of the post said that since the man was apparently stuck in the vent for days in the summer heat, he could have died of a certain number of things, most likely of thirst. Number 1. On September 12, 2015, a disturbed 38-year-old Swedish doctor whose name has not been revealed drugged a woman he knew with strawberries he had laced with Rohypnol, raped her, and then drove her across state to imprison her inside an underground bunker he had built on his property. The woman continued to endure rape and physical harm for a few days until September 18th, when the doctor drove her back to her home 350 miles away to collect her belongings. However, the doctor grew nervous when he arrived to the house to discover police had ransacked the place. This made him decide to take her directly to them to have her inform the authorities that she was okay. Of course, the police knew better and pulled her aside to get the real story out of her. The cops immediately arrested the doctor and searched his home, and what they discovered there proved just how insane this man was. His house contained rubber masks of bearded men and old women, syringes, birth control pills, condoms, the wheelchair he used to carry the woman from her home into his car, and perhaps most disturbingly, wrist and ankle chains attached to the wall. Police speculated by the design of the bunker, with a bathroom and covered courtyard, that the doctor had planned on keeping the woman locked up there for several years. Police also believed that he was planning on doing this for years. He clearly built this bunker for the sole purpose of keeping one or more victims captive. Friends of the doctor were shocked and couldn't believe he would do something like this. He was described as helpful and polite. The exact sentencing for this doctor is unknown, but it's certain he'll be going away for a long time. As a little bonus clip, here's an interesting story. A snorkeler called the emergency services after spotting what he thought were human remains at the bottom of a lake. Police sent someone from their diving team to investigate. He took a camera down there to record the remains, and found two bodies sitting upright in plastic garden chairs and appeared to be having a tea party. One of them held this sign that read, "Bernie living the dream in the river." While the figures looked very real from a distance, upon closer inspection the diver realized that they were plastic fakes planted by scuba divers as a gag. If these were real, this would have made for a pretty horrifying find. Feel free to follow me on Twitter, like me on Facebook, and I will see you in the next one.
A Redditor by the name of Jessica shared footage she recorded in the Airbnb she was renting. There wasn't supposed to be anybody else in the rental, and she didn't even meet the owners as the keys were left in the mailbox. Shortly into her stay, she was getting ready to take a shower when she started hearing sounds from inside the walls. She rushed to get her camera and get the sounds on video. This is what she captured. As you can see, after finding a sealed ventilation duct and pulling the seal off of it, the terrifying voices of people speaking Latin became much clearer and sound as though they were speaking the Trinitarian formula and other religious phrases. Strangely, the voices apparently fell silent abruptly, but that wasn't where the nightmarish experience ended for Jessica. That night, with the bathroom door open and the bathroom light on, a picture was taken of her as she was sleeping, and the person who took the picture was holding a note in front of the camera that said, "It's rude to eavesdrop." This was the security footage recorded one rainy night in Huacho, Brazil. In the recording, a confused-looking woman is seen walking through the street in the rain, and at first this seems relatively normal, nothing too unusual, until the woman seems to slowly disappear as she gets closer to the bottom of the screen, until she vanishes altogether. When zoomed in, you can also see the woman seems scantily dressed for the weather conditions seen in the video. Sure, someone can say it's just a smudge on the screen or perhaps some other digital problem. However, moments later, a motorcycle passes by in the same region in which the woman seemed to vanish, yet it's completely visible. And then the same could be said with the truck as it makes its turn, completely visible. It also appears that the driver of the truck may have been reacting to what he also just witnessed to be a vanishing woman. Whether this was just camera trickery or really a wandering apparition is up to the viewer to decide. This video was captured in Costa Rica on someone's home security camera. At an off hour in the night, out from the woods comes a bizarre, horrifying looking creature. First, one might assume it's just a person doing some kind of crab walk, or if this were Australia, they would just assume it's another spider. But you don't even have to watch too closely to ask why or how the arms and legs would be the same length if this were a person. If it was just a person contorting his or her body, the creature wouldn't appear as long as it does and would most likely have a noticeable lump in its back from them contorting their torso. Also, based on the dog's reactions, this was not the work of CGI, as they were reacting to something that's actually there and cause for alarm. This fourth video was taken from the Japanese YouTube channel Omogotoki Films. Their channel focuses on exploring haunted locations and capturing paranormal events on video. In January of this year, the owners of the channel were contacted by a real estate agent regarding a house he's been having trouble selling, due to the fact that the house used to be owned by a family that mysteriously disappeared in 2013.
僕が前勤めていた不動産屋さんの元先輩、何やら僕らに対してちょっと一度見てほしい物件。
その古い戸建てを会社で買ったんだけど、 急に飛び込みできた人で、まあいくらで売りたいか聞くじゃん。でそしたらもう本当破格の
売り主さんが持っていたその土地の上に3人の家族が家を建てて住み始めたらしいんですよね。ただ今から6、7年ぐらい前にある日を境にその3人
All of the previous owner's belongings were left in the house, adding to the mystery. The real estate agent refuses to even enter the house as he believes there's a dark entity in the house, and he hopes that they would be able to search the house and find any kind of explanation, as this is what they do for a living. The agent mentions to them to make sure to keep all the doors shut while investigating the house, but doesn't mention why. As the two are exploring this closet, they notice something after reviewing the footage. See if you can find it.
ほら、もう全部開いてるもん。ああ、確かに確かに。すっごい、ほんと。物がやばい。うん。
If you didn't see it, behind a clothes rack, you can see 2 bare feet underneath. This isn't the last time they can be seen. As they search a nearby room, the feet can be seen again, this time much closer and visibly barefoot. Later on in the night, one of the two decide to place a camera in the dark and sit in one room, waiting for something to happen. After about 15 minutes, he decided to investigate other rooms, while still remembering to shut all the doors behind him. As you just saw, there was a face looking in through the door, but as he approaches, it disappears. There's no one outside the door. It could be speculated that the house is haunted by the family that mysteriously disappeared almost a decade ago. This was some alleged sighting of La Llorona. La Llorona is known as a ghost who roams waterfront areas mourning her drowned children. This video was captured in León, Guanajuato, Mexico. The video is of a man running from what resembles La Llorona. In the video, if you slow it down and zoom in, the figure in the distance resembles a woman in a white dress crying and yelling. The man was coming home from a party around 3 o'clock in the morning when he encountered the woman in front of him. As he starts to run in fear, the woman starts shouting at him, not making any sense of what she's saying. The man allegedly died 3 days after the sighting, and the cause of death was ruled a heart attack. This video was recorded in November of 2020, and it's just recently getting noticed. This was the footage captured by Russian YouTuber Dark Ghost. He posts high-quality ghost hunting videos, and this one might be one of his scariest. A woman had written to him about her deceased son who was obsessed with the paranormal and finding out what happens to the human soul after death and the afterlife. One day he told his mother that he discovered a way to contact deceased relatives, and he traveled to the abandoned village where his late grandmother lived. A week later, the mother received a call from the son, saying he was hearing the voices of his grandparents among other entities. This call was the last that was heard of the son, and his body was found on the streets of the village. The cause of death was ruled to be acute heart failure. The mother asked Dark Ghost to visit the grandparents' old house where the son would often visit, and this was some of the footage he captured. Various sounds such as footsteps and knocks can be heard throughout the video. And on multiple occasions, doors and cabinets can be seen swinging open or closed on their own. If you didn't see it, a black shadow can be seen floating across the screen clear as day.
Либо шкаф, все грохочет, я не понимаю, либо комод. Опа.
Next, he enters a creepy red room populated with disturbing pictures that the woman's son would collect and bring to the house.
Ну. Вроде бы как. У меня вообще всего тут такого, как бы, фотографий таких. Пипец. Это просто жесть.
This is definitely one of those houses that an explorer should not go to alone. Based on the events in this video, there may have been someone or something in the house with him, watching him the entire time. Could it be the spirit of the woman's son? Or perhaps a much more hostile entity? Or could it all just be trickery? As usual, that's up for you to decide. Everything we don't want usually gets thrown into the garbage for the local sanitation workers, or as we like to call them, garbage men, to pick up. Usually, whatever you have stuffed in trash cans or bags gets dumped into a truck without a second glance, which is why some people feel the garbage truck could be the best place to get rid of some of the skeletons in their closets. Maybe even literally. Garbage men all around the world, as expected, find horrific, disturbing things being dumped into their trucks every day. These are 5 short examples of this with downright creepy backstories. This experience was shared to me by a New York State sanitation worker named Ricky. Ricky had a set group of coworkers on his truck: the driver, Norm, and the other trash collector who would ride on the back of the truck along with Ricky, named Al. Al was always a rough and tough kind of guy. He had the long grayish beard, bald head, stocky build, tattoo-covered arms, and the deep trucker's voice. He was the kind of guy who you wouldn't want to get on their bad side. Long story short, Ricky and Norm were as close with Al as his aggressive and demeaning personality could allow. There really wasn't much fun between the three, and it was mostly a show-up, do-the-work kind of relationship. One particular day, Ricky noticed Al was acting really strange, quieter, noticeably unhappy. When he attempted to approach Al and get him to open up to be friendly, Al responded with a lot of hostility, saying things like, "Mind your own business, I'm not unhappy, focus on the job." Clearly something was going on in his personal life, and he wasn't the type to be open about things, so Ricky just left it alone. Now on the route they were assigned to, the truck passed both Norm and Al's house at some point. On this particular day, when they stopped at Al's house, he told Rick firmly to run down to the next house over and grab the plastic table that was sitting by the curb.
Ricky said, "No, I'll just wait until we get over there." In response, Al yelled at him to just do it. Confused and a bit afraid, Ricky conformed and started walking over to the next house. As Ricky picked up the table and started heading back to the truck, after responding to Norm's confused hand motions behind the wheel, Ricky noticed Al hurriedly throwing a bag into the back of the truck. When Ricky threw the table into the truck, he saw the long black bag sitting over the rest of the waste, and imagined the worst. But knowing Al's aggressive and defensive nature, he kept quiet. By the end of the shift, when Al had left, Ricky stopped Norm and told him what happened. The two reported what happened to one of their superiors, and the waste that was dumped from the truck was thoroughly searched. Eventually, they found the black bag that Al had dumped into the truck, and the now squishy red contents that had been oozing from the bag. Robert Calvin was temporarily a garbage man for a city department in Los Angeles one summer because a guy quit. Originally, his job was only to consist of mowing grass and whatnot around town. However, he and his temporary team received a call from the mayor one day, requesting that they go pick up the remaining stuff in an evicted tenant's apartment. The collectors arrived and found that there were clothes everywhere, a bed, some other furniture, and a couch. The place was absolutely disgusting. Along with the clothes, garbage was scattered everywhere, the rugs were stained, there were even holes in the wooden living room floor. When going to help a few guys lift the bed and couch, Robert had noticed empty vials laying around the floor. He told his co-workers to be cautious as he knew there was a possibility of needles having been stuffed in the furniture. After taking a closer look, Robert and his co-workers realized that this guy had shoved dirty needles down his couch and bed in hopes of someone picking it up and getting stabbed. Tucked further beneath the couch cushion was a small crumpled up note, saying, "You're not getting off this easy." What was found in the trash can in the backyard was even more disturbing. Filled to the brim was a trash can full of worn-out children's dolls, and in most of the dolls' tiny plastic arms were tiny holes assumed to have come from the needles. It was safe for the workers to assume that the man who had been evicted from the house had his fair share of illegal drugs. A sanitation worker named Sarah shared one of her experiences as a garbage collector with the internet. Sarah explained that while it's not seen on cop shows, police enlist the help of garbage collectors to look for crime scene evidence and collected waste. Near Sarah's trash route is a known meth haven, and from time to time the cops would ask Sarah and her co-workers if they had found certain types of items in the trash, like certain kinds of containers or chemicals. Interestingly, she and her co-workers would also be asked to look for burglary-type objects such as weapons if there were to be a local robbery. On a more notable occasion, Sarah was asked to keep an eye out for cash registers in the trash because robbers could tend to steal entire registers, bring them home, and then toss them in the garbage when they empty them, assuming like everyone else that whatever ends up in the garbage is out of sight and out of mind of anyone. One more disturbing experience, however, was when Sarah and co-workers found a leg stuffed in a garbage bag in somebody's trash can. On that same day after the shift when police were notified, it was discovered that Sarah and her co-workers had picked up more than one body parts. In fact, the body parts had been dumped strategically around town in random houses' trash cans, and they needed to search all of the trash to find the whole body. A Reddit user named Georgie P, who happens to be a garbage man, who has a number of posts relating to sanitation work, shared his story in a Reddit post asking garbage men what was the most disturbing things they found in people's garbage. Georgie works in North Carolina, and he explained that despite what people may think, garbage men are nosy and do like to peek a bit through people's garbage bins before dumping them into the trucks. Well, one particular day when he did that at a corner house in Winterville, North Carolina, he found a white, half-sealed plastic bag, and through the opening up top was a sketchy-looking picture of a young girl. Georgie took the bag out, opened it, and found that there was at least a pound's worth of images of the same young girl, who appeared to be about 13 years old. He called his co-worker over to check it out with him. Some images were school portraits, but most of the others were a lot creepier. Most of them seemed to have been taken without the girl's knowledge. Some appeared to have been taken through an upstairs window aimed to a house across the street, specifically zoomed into a room with the light on, and with the same young girl getting dressed in her bedroom. It seemed as they went through the pile, the images only got more and more disturbing. Georgie told his coworker to call the police as he continued flipping through the images. The creepiness levels peaked as high as they could go, however, when Georgie held up an image that was taken in a dark room. It became clear what it was very quickly. It was a picture of the little girl sleeping in her bed, taken by somebody standing right above her bed. The owner of the house was home, and he was arrested that same day and possibly charged with stalking of a child pornography since some of the images captured the young girl while she was nude, and breaking and entering. This last mention on this list is told in first-person point of view by a current sanitation worker named Hugo. I work as a garbage man in Manchester. I've been doing this for 11 years, so I've seen all of the weird shit that gets thrown out. Or at least I thought I did, before this. It was a day like any other. The shift was going as quick as could be expected, and there wasn't a cloud in the sky. The truck emitted its ear-piercing shriek as it came to a stop. The sound I'm beyond used to, which signaled when I needed to hop off the truck and chuck the unwanted waste inside yet another plastic container into the giant pungent truck that has become a part of my life. However, at this one particular house, in this one particular container, was a Lenovo laptop. I picked it up, and it seemed to be in pristine condition, besides the grease and the little pieces of food that it had collected from sitting in a garbage can, but rubbing it off with my heavy work shirt, it was about as good as new. I naturally took a look at the house to see if the owner saw me take their laptop, and to my surprise, there was somebody standing by the window behind the partially open curtains. He was kind of peeking at me as if he didn't want me to see him. It was actually quite disturbing. Now I felt weird taking the laptop, so while still holding it, I took the garbage can and dumped it into the truck while pretending to do the same with the laptop. Instead, however, I placed the laptop on the back platform of the truck, returned the plastic pail to the curb, knocked on the side of the truck, and we moved along to the next house. That was where I handed my driver the laptop to hold onto. As I picked up the can at the next house, I noticed the guy from the previous house coming out to check his empty pail, and then turning to me and walking over to me. I returned the favor and met him halfway, and he just cut straight to the chase and asked me if I took his laptop. I felt my heart drop a bit for some reason, and stuttered at first, telling him I threw it in the back of the truck. What he asked me next shocked me. He asked if he could check the back of the truck to look for the laptop. Now I felt really awkward, but recovered by telling him firmly I have no time to play games, we are on a tight schedule. I simply walked back to the truck, dumped the contents of the pail into the truck, and we moved on. Luckily that block ended with that house, and we were able to sail away from that creep. The wind in my face had never felt so good. His reaction to my possibly taking his laptop only made me grow even more curious as to what was on it, which is why I lied and told him I threw it out in the first place. When my shift ended, I took the laptop to my car and drove home. On the way, I couldn't stop staring at that laptop. I just had to know what was on it. I pulled to the side of a deserted road and turned on the laptop, which surprisingly had battery left. The computer loaded up fast, like less than 30 seconds, and there was no password to the account, which was just titled Roy. I was wondering why he would throw this away. My question was answered very quickly. Scattered across the messy desktop were folders on top of folders, all titled very ambiguously. For example, one titled Fun Powder, another titled V288, and another titled Fruit Patch Boys. Inside all of the folders I clicked on were hundreds of videos and pictures of underage porn. I could only open about 4 before I started to feel sick to my stomach. I ended up dialing 911 and reporting this guy for child pornography possession. Now, the guy had pictures of himself on the computer, so I was not digging my own grave here by calling 911. However, as I should have guessed, the guy skipped town.
I found a lot of messed up shit during my career, but never anything as bad as this. Maybe this guy would have gotten away with it had he just been smart and tucked the laptop underneath another bag. Has anyone ever had sleep paralysis before? I tell you, it's one of the strangest, most fascinating, yet horrifying things that you could experience. It's the feeling of being unable to move upon awakening. Your senses and awareness are intact, but you still feel as though you're in this half-asleep, half-awake state. I'd heard stories of this long before it happened to me. I've only experienced it once. I was in college. I was going through an incredibly tough time in my life. I was insanely stressed during finals week. I wasn't getting much sleep. It must have been the night before my last final. I went to bed late because I stayed up all night studying for bio. I don't remember at what point I decided to finally call it. I just remember it all becoming a blur, then blackness. Next thing I remember, I was in my room, in my bed, but there was this weird haziness in my awareness. Like I was awake, but I felt weaker. And when I tried to move, I couldn't. I could only move my eyes to look around the dark room. At one point, when I guess I was looking to one side of the room, I looked back to the center, and there was this woman standing dead center in the room, facing the bed. She was wearing this black dress and holding some long object. I wanted to call out, "Mom?" but my paralysis prevented it. I couldn't say anything. The woman came closer to me until she knelt down and touched my forehead, and I could feel it. She got eye to eye with me, and I could see my mother's face. I tried to say "Mom" again, desperately, but I was stuck in my own body. She stood back up and walked to the doorway before disappearing into the house. I lay there unable to move maybe another 10 to 20 seconds before my vision suddenly became more clear, and I was able to think more clearly as well. I was able to sit up. I jumped out of the bed screaming "Mom" over and over. I ran to the bedroom hallway yelling her name. A door opened down the hall and someone came to hug me, but it wasn't my mom. It was my dad, telling me he misses her too. My mom died 3 weeks before this happened. You know what I love about dreams? How vague and how bizarre they can be. You feel like you're in this separate world where things can just make no sense. Now what about when that unearthliness transcends into the quote-unquote real world? You'll see what I mean in a minute. I was in REM sleep having this bizarre nightmare about being followed by some weird creature in the middle of the woods. The dream became fuzzy though, and I kind of woke up from it. I say kind of, because while I was out of the dream and back in my bed, I couldn't move a muscle in my body. I started hearing this faint, weird noise. It was this indescribable, robotic, yet alive type sound. It started light and soft, but it repeated every 3 seconds. I noticed it was getting slightly louder every time. I felt like the sound was getting closer. It got so unbearably loud in my head, I just wanted to scream, but I couldn't. Then my eyes locked onto the closet door, specifically the crack in the closet door, which I never leave open ever. There was this distorted face of a man looking between the crack, with this unhumanly large open-mouthed smile, and every time I heard the noise, it seemed as if the closet and the face were getting closer, until the closet door slammed shut, and everything went silent. I regained control of my body shortly after that, and the first thing I did, even though I was 24 years old, was run to my parents' room to get my dad to check the closet with me. There was nothing in the closet though, or the rest of my room. My dad seemed pretty confident that what I just experienced was sleep paralysis, and that he had experienced it once as well. Didn't make me feel any less disturbed about what I just went through. Many years ago, I had a sleep paralysis experience. I knew there was a thing in my closet, something really evil, but I also knew I was dreaming and I should face my fear. I tried not to look directly at the closet door, but if I moved my eyes, my head would turn away. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't look directly at it. Then I woke up in a cold sweat. At first I felt really relieved that it was over, but very shortly I realized it wasn't a dream and there was really something in the closet. I was laying on my back and couldn't move, and I didn't really hear it, but I could kind of feel the sickening laughter wash over me in waves, emanating from the closet. All of a sudden the thing throws a human head at me and it lands on my chest face up. It was this girl I knew in high school. Up to this point I was kind of holding it together, terrified but not panicked. Well, I lose it now. I can't even scream, all I could do is make these grunting sounds and moaning noises. I'm wriggling and straining, trying to rock from side to side to get it off me, but I can't move. This seemed to last maybe another minute or two, and then I really woke up. It was so traumatic that for weeks I would be scared when I woke up that I wasn't actually awake and something horrible could happen at any second. It still makes my skin crawl when I think about that laugh. The thing is, I never heard of sleep paralysis or night terrors at that point in my life. I thought I was losing my mind. I've suffered sleep paralysis a total of 3 times in my life. The first 2 times, it just consisted of me waking up not being able to move my body. The third time was much different though. I had woken up very early morning, probably like between 5 and 6 a.m. when the sun was just starting to come up. There was light in the room, but barely any. I tried to move, but I had that unfortunately familiar feeling of paralysis, helplessness. My eyes fixated on the wall. There was nothing I could do. Then suddenly, I heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs of my bedroom. It was my brother, followed by my sister, dad, and mom. They were all sobbing hysterically, and they all seemed to be at least a foot taller. It was unnerving. The 4 of them approached my bed, then stopped at the bedside, towering over me, all 4 of them crying. I couldn't move. I wanted to cry for help or just yell at them to stop because they were scaring me. Their heights, they looked like they were near to hitting the ceiling. Then, just as quickly as they entered, all 4 of them turned and walked back down the stairs. I could move again, and so I ran down the stairs to follow them, but they weren't in the outside area. I went to each of their rooms one at a time. All 4 of them were fast asleep. My heart was racing because the most surreal, unnerving thing just happened to me. I had to lean on the wall to gather my thoughts for a second, breathing heavily. Falling back asleep was futile the rest of the night. I lay awake until the sun was fully up. A few days later, I was struck by a speeding car when crossing the road with friends and ended up with 3 broken bones and a fractured thigh bone. I was hospitalized for a week, and at one point, all 4 of my family members stood next to my hospital bed, looking down at me, my mom being emotional and crying. It was almost the same image from my sleep paralysis. I'm not superstitious at all, but if I were, I would 100% believe that dream was some kind of sign, or some kind of prediction of the future. In fact, I just got chills writing that last sentence, thinking about it. There was this one time I was out late drinking with friends. It was some point in the summer of 2016. We were kind of just walking around town and then around the neighborhood when one of my friends spotted someone hiding in a bush. He pointed and said, "Look," and we all walked a little closer to get a better look. We could see what he was talking about, but just barely. It was bizarre, like someone hiding in this bush in front of this house. When we got too close, apparently, this weird, off-putting sound started coming from the bush. So we all screamed and laughed and ran away. We screamed because it was scary, but laughed because at the same time it was bizarrely funny. And there were a lot of us, so... Anyway, we walked back to our houses respectively, assuming whoever was in that bush was just messing with people. I fell asleep pretty easily that night since I was drunk, but next thing I remember was waking up to the near pitch blackness of my room. I couldn't look at the clock to see what time it was because I literally couldn't move. I was in a sleep paralysis state. I looked around the room with my eyes only and started to hear a familiar noise, the noise we heard coming from that bush. Then I looked straight in front of me, at the foot of my bed, and what I saw was pure nightmare fuel. It was what appeared to be this floating, grotesque, horrific head of a demonic ghost-like thing. As it got closer to me, I realized it wasn't floating. There was a body, but its body blended in with the blackness of the room. Its mouth hung open, and it just kept making the familiar noise from the bush. It got mere inches from my face before it suddenly just faded away, and I was able to let out a scream and move my body. I sat in my bed, panting and heart racing. I flicked on the lamp and checked around my bed, but that demonic thing was gone. What I just experienced seemed so real, like I was awake for it. It wasn't a dream. I told my parents about it the next day, and they agreed with me that it was sleep paralysis, though they had never heard of anyone seeing freaky shit like that before.
This happened to my dad when he was a little kid. I think it messed him up a bit emotionally, but he never admitted it. This story freaks me out just imagining it. So I'm pretty sure my dad was 10 years old, and he was home alone for whatever reason. He was watching TV in the living room. It was the only TV in the house, and all of a sudden, the TV just shut off. So he got up and turned it back on. It was an old shitty TV, so it wasn't weird at all. When he got back on his couch, it happened again. He got up once again and turned the TV back on, and again it turned off. He repeated this process a couple more times before he started to look for the remote. While looking for the remote, he walked over to check behind one of the couches and saw a man hiding in the corner, holding the TV remote. My dad described the man as having long, messy hair and a crazed look in his eyes. He gave my dad a smile, and my dad ran out the front door screaming like a little girl. He went to his neighbors, who called the police. The man was still in the house when the police got there, so he was arrested. My dad told me that he still assumes the man was either homeless or crazy. Either way, this story is downright terrifying. My friend told me about something that happened to her when she was younger, about 8 or 9. She was walking home from school and got her key out to let herself into the house. Her single mom worked and came home later on weekdays. As she reached up to put the key in the door, her mom opened it in a dressing gown, having left work sick. Instead of greeting her, she looked straight past my friend and immediately said, "Who are you?" My friend turned around, and a man in a long coat hurried back down the path and down the street. Being ill that day had possibly saved her daughter from something potentially horrible happening to her. Before I start this story, I want to note that Jacob's mother is a drug addict, and his father really didn't have much wrong with him outside of being with his mother. So one night, when Jacob and his father were asleep, they heard a series of loud banging, scratching, and moving noises coming from the mother's room. Jacob's father jumped out of the bed and ran down the hall and started slamming on the door. His mother opened it, yelling at him to quiet down and that he woke her up. He asked her about the sounds. She hadn't been awake to hear them. Jacob's dad would have assumed that she was on something again, but something was wrong. The window was open all the way, and the TV was moved across the room, still plugged in, and had the screen facing outside. Jacob's dad was reasonably scared. He shut the window, got his bat, locked the mother's room from the outside, and made her sleep in the living room. He stayed up most of the night. He woke up Jacob at 5. It was still dark out. Jacob went out to the kitchen where his mother already was. A couple minutes later, his dad walked in, wide-eyed. He pointed at Jacob and his mother and held his finger to his lips. They both quieted down. They heard something shuffling around on the roof, going from edge to edge. Jacob's dad had the bat. They sat together in the room quietly. Minutes later, the sound went away. Jacob's grandmother was called. She was asked if everybody could stay over there for a little while. She said yes and told them she'd come pick them up. Jacob finished eating and went to go sit on the couch. There was no TV in that room, so he sat in silence. He looked over at a door to an empty room in the hallway. The door was open. There was a finger wrapped around the side of it. Jacob screamed and pointed to it, and his father grabbed him and ran out. Jacob's mother followed behind. They went to a gas station and sat out front until they saw Jacob's grandmother's truck. Jacob described how unnatural the finger looked to me. He said it reminded him a little bit of a foam finger in length and width. It was wrapped clear around the door frame, the door itself being latched on the opposite side. They didn't go back to that house much after that. Once they'd gotten everything out of it, they never went back again. Nothing was stolen, and the window in the empty room was open. I was 13 years old. I had the most isolated bedroom imaginable. Mix that with a wild imagination, and I was often up late at night, scared and paranoid, unable to fall asleep. My bedroom was a separate floor of the house, on the opposite side of my parents' room. They had no way of hearing what was going on in my room. So it was a seemingly ordinary night, with a bit of rain, but not a storm. I woke up and looked at my clock, and saw that it was 2 a.m. I got an uncomfortable feeling right away, but I didn't know why. I then saw at the edge of my bed, there was a shadow of something roundish just over the head of the edge of my bed. My heart started racing until I realized it was just my hat. I sometimes hung my hat on one of the wooden poles at the edge of my bed, so I calmed myself down and fell back asleep. I woke up again around half an hour later and was again startled by the sight of the shadow at the end of my bed. But after my brain started to fully wake up, I remembered it was just my hat again. This process happened one more time that night, probably another half hour later, and once again, I was startled by the sight of the shadow. I was getting thirsty, so I reached my hand down to the side of my bed, looking for my water bottle, but I instead found something else. My hat. And at that instant, I felt my heart drop into my stomach, as I almost fell out of my bed trying to turn the lamp on. The light revealed the face of a man, peering over the edge of my bed, staring right into my eyes. I let out the highest pitched scream a boy could possibly produce, and ran straight past the man and down the stairs of my room. I felt the man try to grab me, but I managed to open the door and run to my parents' room to get my dad. My dad got the baton from under his bed and raced to my room, but he was too late. When we got back to my room, the window was wide open. Apparently the man jumped out onto the patio roof outside my window. When I was a kid, I had a huge group of friends that all happened to be on my block. On the weekend nights, we would always play manhunt, aka hide and go seek for older people. It worked out great because since we were all neighbors, we used all the front and backyards and even the woods behind our houses. We had a rule though, that we couldn't go out more than a backyard's length into the woods. I always used the same hiding spot, and nobody ever found me. I always hid behind an old rusty barrel that was thrown into the woods years ago. So on this particular night, there were only 6 of us playing. My friends Joe and Raj were on my team. We quickly dispersed as we were the first to hide. I ran to my usual hiding spot, through my backyard into the woods behind the barrel. Usually I would see the flashlights of the other team shining through the backyards in the woods, but it was unusually quiet this time. And then, I finally heard footsteps nearby. I didn't see a flashlight, so I assumed it was one of my teammates. I whispered Joe and Raj's names, but then whoever it was started charging at me, full on sprinting. I immediately shot up and ran out of the woods to find a new hiding spot in my backyard, but nobody ever came out of the woods. I heard all my friends calling my name from out front, including Joe and Raj, so I assumed something was wrong and went up front. I saw Joe's parents talking with my parents, with all my friends surrounding. My parents seemed a bit relieved to see me, so I was naturally really confused. They told me that a police officer had just passed by and warned them about a serial rapist spotted in the area and that all the kids should stay indoors. I explained what happened to me in the woods, and my parents started freaking out, making 100% sure that I wasn't lying. They called the police. I really don't know if he was ever caught, but I really hope he was. I try not to think about what would have happened to me had whoever that was caught me. When I was maybe 12 or 13, me, my mom, my stepdad, and 2 dogs went to the beach for a weekend. We rented an apartment all the way at the back of the shore. The apartment had nothing surreal to it at first sight. We unpacked everything and went out for dinner straight afterwards. We came back and at the time it was maybe 9 p.m. We watched some TV for an hour or so. My mom, stepdad, and 2 dogs slept on a bed you could make from the couch. They gave me the bedroom with a king-sized bed. I went to bed and used my computer for a while to play some games that I had pre-installed since I knew that there would be no internet connection there. I stayed up playing games pretty late at night. I decided it was time to get some shut-eye and go to sleep. Maybe after 5 minutes of laying in my bed, complete silence filled the room. But then, all of a sudden, I hear this extremely loud sigh. I knew it wasn't my parents or the dogs, considering the door to the living room was closed. I straight bolted from that room and went to sleep in the bedroom opposite of the master bedroom. My heart was pounding so fast because I was absolutely petrified. Needless to say, no sleep was had that night. I told my parents about it the next morning and they told me it was probably just my imagination, but I was certain it was not. This story still gives me nightmares to this day. I was staying with one of my best friends in North Carolina where I had a job interview. I was coming from New Jersey and my friend Mike offered to let me crash at his place for a few days. He didn't necessarily live too close to the company I was interviewing for, about 2 hours away, but I also just wanted to see one of my good friends again. So this happened after the second interview. I came back to Mike's place in a good mood as I had been offered the job on the spot. We celebrated in the yard that night with a few friends and a few beers, or a lot of beers. We stayed up late and basically got shit-faced. People were coming and going all night. That's the kind of person Mike is. He didn't really keep track of who entered and left his house. So at about 4 in the morning, after everyone had left, we called it a night. I struggled to make it up the stairs and to the bathroom. I drained the snake and soaked my face with hot water, and it was at that moment that I thought I could see something in the corner of my eye. I turned to the half-open door and saw an eye poking in at me through the crack of the door. I let out a loud "holy shit," and in my drunken klutzy state, I fell to the floor. When I got back on my feet, the eye was gone. I stumbled out of the bathroom and called Mike's name. I heard him call out in response from downstairs in the kitchen. It couldn't have possibly been him. I didn't hear anyone go down the stairs, but I asked if he was up there anyway. Expectedly, he replied with a no. I can't remember fully, but I assume I just brushed it off under the assumption that I had too much to drink. I made it to the guest bedroom and basically fell onto the bed, barely managing to throw the covers over myself. You know when you're drunk you fall asleep easier. That's an understatement. I think I fell asleep seconds after falling onto that bed, only to wake up after an unknown duration of sleep. I immediately felt the unbearable headache coming on, and began to rub my head. It was probably a little before sunrise. The room was a bit chilly. My foot was sticking out of the covers, hanging over the edge of the bed. And then it happened. I felt something extremely cold grab onto my foot and start stroking it. I then heard a raspy voice whisper the words, "Can you help me?" I sat up and screamed at the top of my lungs before sprinting out of the bed and out of the room, meeting Mike at the top of the stairs. I called the police and they arrived shortly. The intruder was actually a woman in her late 40s who clearly suffered from some kind of addiction. She admitted to simply walking right into Mike's house and hiding in a closet. The eye I saw was hers, peeking at me while in the bathroom. I always make sure to cover my feet with my sheets now. It was the dead of winter in Cali. Me and a couple buddies were on a skiing trip by South Lake Tahoe. We stayed in a big luxurious log cabin for a few nights. On the third night during a blizzard, I got up to get a glass of water late in the night. As I crossed the cabin over to the kitchen, there was a frantic knock at the door. I was a bit spooked that somebody would be knocking this late. I thought maybe I should just ignore it and let them go away. But I realized they knew we were there, as my car was parked right outside. I also had the thought that maybe somebody was in trouble and needed to get out of the dangerous weather. I tiptoed over to the door and waited for another knock. It didn't take too long before the knocking came again, this time much louder and more frantic. "Who is it?" I asked. Nobody answered. I asked again louder, but there was still no answer. After I asked this, there was no more knocking. I grew curious and eventually opened the door a crack with the chain lock still on just in case. Nobody was outside. I undid the lock and opened the door completely. There were footprints in the snow leading away from the cabin. For whatever stupid reason, maybe I felt some kind of guilt and worry for a person in need. I slipped on my boots and jacket and stepped out into the storm to follow the footsteps before they were completely filled. The footsteps led me to the edge of the property before completely stopping. I shit you not, the footprints completely ended, not a sign of vehicle marks, a struggle, nothing. It was as if whoever made the tracks was standing still, right where I was. I felt disturbed and ran back into the cabin and slammed the door shut behind me, making sure to lock it. Before I could even gather my thoughts, the frantic knocking at the door resumed. My heart started pounding, and I started to scream for my friends. One by one, they all rushed down to see what was wrong. When we opened the door, there was nobody there. The footprints were already filled. I never could prove what happened to my friends. I don't blame them for not believing me. I almost don't believe myself, but I know it happened. I just can't even try to explain it. It still freaks me out to this day. My friend and I were going to a party a few hours out of town, so we decided to stay at her family's holiday house about an hour south of the party. We arrived around mid-afternoon, and it was winter in a holiday town, so the area was completely empty, no other cars on the street. When we left for the party, I spent a moment deciding whether to pull the gate all the way closed. I'd had some trouble opening it earlier when we arrived, and if we were getting home late at night, I didn't want to be stuck outside. I ended up deciding to shut it for security. The party was great. We got back to the house around 12:30, and the gate was open. I immediately felt on edge because not only did I know that I had locked it, but I knew it couldn't just blow open in the wind. But I didn't want to make a big deal, so I was vague when my friend asked me if I'd shut it. We went inside and decided to make a snack. I was wandering through the house when suddenly my friend raced from the kitchen into the hallway and virtually tackled me to the ground. She was convinced she'd heard someone walking around outside. We tried to calm ourselves down, but we had no cell reception and there was no one else around. Over the next half hour or so, as we sat in the hallway paralyzed with fear, we heard footsteps outside and the back door being jimmied. We decided we had to leave, so we gathered everything up and got ready to make a break for the car. Just as we were at the front door ready to leave, there was a huge bang in the backyard, and suddenly what sounded like hundreds of birds started screaming. We legged it to the car, ended up starting it with all our stuff still on our laps. We hadn't bothered to even put in the back seat. As we reversed out the driveway, we saw somebody running up the side of the house towards us. We sped the entire way home, and didn't sleep at all that night. When I was 10 and my youngest brother Ben was only 1, there was this one weekend that my parents were painting our bedrooms, so we would have to sleep in the basement. There was a pull-out couch down there that turned into a bed, and Ben had an extra crib down there. I was only 10, so sleeping in a pitch-dark basement was very uncomfortable. Somehow, having Ben down there made me feel a bit safer though. He would wake me up in the middle of the night crying, and for some reason, tending to him made sleeping down there a little less scary. But it was this one time that I woke up to him screaming. Not crying, screaming, like no 1-year-old should. I was scared shitless immediately and ran over to him to see what was wrong. He was standing up looking at me, pointing to something. I looked in the direction he was pointing at. He was pointing into the pitch-dark boiler room right next to his crib. I felt like 1,000 knives just stabbed me in the chest, and even through the heat of the moment, I vaguely remember the faint sound of something falling over in the boiler room, and I felt as if I was being watched in that basement. I grabbed Ben and got the hell out of there as quickly as possible. I have never gone back down in that basement. Number 6. Living Gnome. In 2008, a creepy gnome was caught on film in Argentina. Jose Alvarez, who filmed the gnome, reported that they caught the creature on film while larking about in their hometown of General Güemes, Argentina. He stated, "We were chatting about our last fishing trip. It was 1 in the morning. I began to film a bit with my mobile phone while the others were chatting and joking. Suddenly we heard something, a weird noise as if someone was throwing stones. We looked to one side and saw that the grass was moving. To begin with, we thought it was a dog, but when we saw this gnome-like figure begin to emerge, we were really afraid." Other locals have since come forward to say that they have spotted the gnome, and the town has been covered in a pall of fear ever since the first sighting. Number 5. The Devil's Footprints. On the night of February 9th, 1855, after a light snowfall, a series of hoof-like marks appeared in the snow. These footprints, measuring 1.5 to 2.5 inches wide and 8 inches apart, continued throughout the countryside for a total of over 100 miles, and although veering at various points, for the greater part of their course followed straight lines. Houses, rivers, haystacks, and other obstacles were traveled straight over, and footprints appeared on the tops of snow-covered roofs and high walls which lay in the footprints' path, as well as leading up to and exiting various drain pipes of as small as a 4-inch diameter. There were also rumors about sightings of a devil-like figure in the Devon area during the scare. Many townspeople armed themselves and attempted to track down the beast responsible without success. Recently, on the night of March 12, 2009, more strange marks, corresponding to those left in 1855, were found again in Devon. Number 4. Jeff. In September 1931, the Irving family claimed to hear persistent scratching and rustling noises behind their farmhouse's wooden wall panels. At first, they thought it was a rat, but then the unseen creature began making different sounds, sometimes spitting like a ferret, or growling like a dog, or gurgling like a baby. The creature soon revealed an ability to speak, and introduced itself as Jeff, a mongoose. It claimed to have been born in New Delhi, India, in 1852. According to Vori, the daughter, who was the only person to see him properly, Jeff was the size of a small rat with yellowish fur and a large bushy tail. Jeff variously claimed to be an extra clever mongoose, an earthbound spirit, and a ghost in the form of a weasel. He once said, "I am a freak. I have hands and I have feet, and if you saw me, you would faint. You'd be petrified, mummified, turned into stone or a pillar of salt." Vori Irving, who took Jeff under her wing, died in 2005. In an interview published late in life, she claimed that Jeff was not her creation. Number 3. James Warson. On September 3rd, 1873, a man named James Warson had accepted a challenge to race in record time from the town of Leamington to the town of Coventry, a 20-mile trek. He had been boasting of his foot skills and then was asked to prove them, so, with sporting good spirits, he set about to do just that. Two friends, Hammerson Burns and Barham Wise, followed behind in a horse-drawn carriage. Burns brought along his camera. Warson was never out of their sight, and would often turn around while running to exchange some friendly words with the two riders. Running in the middle of the road, Warson suddenly appeared to stumble and pitch forward, having time enough for only one short, piercing scream. Wise later said it was the most ghastly sound either of us have ever heard. But as Warson pitched forward with that terrible cry, instead of falling to the ground as he appeared to be about to have done, he completely and totally vanished in mid-fall before ever striking the ground. The road itself told the story and Wise took the pictures to prove it. There, in the soft dirt, were Warson's footprints. They led down the middle of the road, looked as if the runner stumbled, and there they disappeared. A search was called and the locals scoured the area for James. The bloodhounds used in the search were strangely reluctant to approach the spot where Warson disappeared. He was never seen or heard from again. Number 2. August 7th, 1973 will remain a day of mystery and possible tragedy. Several people in New Mexico that day, using CB radios, heard the disturbing cries for help from a little boy. He said his name was Larry, and that he was trapped in a red and white pickup truck. He was with his father, who he thinks had a heart attack and was dead. He said that they had been on a rabbit hunting trip when his father collapsed on the steering wheel. Larry claimed that the truck had flipped over into a ravine and both doors were jammed shut and he was unable to escape. The boy's signal faded in and out over the next few days, and was also heard in California, Wyoming, and Arizona. In a panic, Larry began to flip between channels crying for help. Police began a search and rescue team. One helicopter pilot who was searching the Manzano Mountains in New Mexico for Larry says that he made contact with a little boy calling for help, but he called himself David, not Larry. A family traveling from Missouri was reported missing on August 11th, and they had a son named Larry, but they were eventually found. On August 12th, an army sergeant claimed to have spoken to the boy for 3 hours, but could not get him to give more information about himself, like his phone number or address, etc. No more contact could be made with Larry. It is presumed his battery died. The search was called off on August 13th. The police stated that there was no concrete evidence. They also say that the boy, if real, may have died sooner than the transmission stopped, and that the subsequent transmissions from different states, some were even heard in Canada, were hoaxes. Many believe it was a hoax, but those who spoke to Larry swear to this day that it wasn't, that the emotion and the crying they heard from little Larry was no doubt the real thing. Number 1. On November 29th, 1970, a professor and his daughters were hiking in the Isdalen Valley in Norway when they came across the partially charred remains of a young woman. She was surrounded by a large quantity of sleeping pills and bottles of gasoline. All the clothing she was wearing had the tags removed and her fingerprints had been sanded off. A dental screening was done, and some of her dental work was done using techniques only found in Latin America. She was eventually traced back to 2 suitcases at the NSB train station in Bergen. Her luggage contained a prescription lotion with the doctor's name removed, and a few pieces of broken glass with partial fingerprints, and 500 German marks, which is the equivalent of $350 under the lining of one of the suitcases. They discovered the woman had traveled by train across Europe under 9 different names. There were diaries found with her things that contained cryptic notes that the police deciphered were codes listing the places that she had been. Witnesses say she wore wigs as she traveled and spoke several languages such as French, German, English, and Dutch. She stayed at several hotels in Bergen. After checking into each, she would change rooms several times, always requiring a balcony, and would always order porridge with milk for room service. A local man came to the police saying that 5 days prior to the body's discovery, he came across a very elegant woman while hiking. He noted that she wasn't dressed for being outdoors, much less on a remote hiking trail, and that her face was distorted with fear. He claimed that she attempted to mouth something to him, but was followed closely by 2 large men in black coats. The man waited 32 years to come public with this story, stating that when he contacted the police, the officer who answered told him, "Forget her, she was dispatched. The case will never be solved."
This first video was uploaded by a YouTuber who created his channel to document the weird things going on in his house. He finds that the screwdriver on his kitchen counter seems to be moving on its own, so he checks under the cabinet to apparently show there's no kind of trickery underneath, and also shows there's no kinds of magnets or anything when he picks up the screwdriver. After that, stomps can be heard from above him in the attic, so he goes up there to check.
Hello? Hello?
After finding nothing, the video cuts out. Randonautica is an app that sends you on a random adventure to explore the world around you. The app randomly generates a point on the map that you have to follow the way to. People have been reporting finding weird and paranormal things at their destinations, such as in this video. The app sent the person who recorded this video to a ditch in the middle of nowhere by a highway. Inside of the ditch, he found one tricycle and one small bike with training wheels. At the end of the video, very faint children's laughter can be heard. This is a short and straightforward clip of a man sitting in his bed in a dimly lit room who started recording after hearing noises and seeing his door slightly move. This is what he caught. The man was brave enough to get up right away and check the darkness outside of his bedroom, only to find nothing. This video was filmed by a boy recording his friend jumping into his trampoline. As the two are having their fun, you can notice something in the left corner of the video. You can see a figure dressed in white with black hair crawling out from under the trampoline. To this day, the two say they have no idea who the person was. This footage was taken by YouTuber Franco TV, the location being the old South Pittsburgh Hospital in Tennessee, regarded as one of the most haunted buildings in America. Throughout the video, various sounds and voices can be heard, and things can be seen moving throughout the hospital. As Franco enters the in-house pharmacy, viewers believe they can hear a voice saying either "get out" or "hello." Seconds later, 3 medicine bottles fall over completely on their own.
My night vision, the other side there. Whoa. Are you kidding me? Look at this. No freaking way. I literally... What the hell was that? All these bottles just got pushed down. Frontwards and backwards. And it's oxycodone. That is a very, very addictive drug. And there is a spirit here that haunts this place that apparently is always waiting for a drug dealer or whatever to come in here that overdosed in this hospital.
Later on in the video, after many creepy mannequins, dolls, and moving objects later, Franco finds himself in a hallway where a child's horse toy is seen rocking back and forth on its own and making noises. This leads Franco to believe there's a child spirit in the hallway with him.
Oh my god. That horse is moving. And it's on. What the hell? Is that your horse? Do you like playing with the horse? I feel like this is like a child's spirit in this room. And it oddly got actually cold.
The video truly does make this hospital seem like a hotbed of paranormal activity. This is the video a Redditor captured of their baby. The baby seems to be struggling to hold onto the remote, as though an unseen presence is trying to grab it from him. The baby even says no and stop. If that doesn't convince you, the truly shocking part is towards the end of the video here, where the remote can literally be seen flying out of the baby's hands to the left, only for him to reach and grab it to stop it. So was this a setup by the parents, or was something else really in the room trying to grab the remote from the child? This is another video involving a baby, this one captured on a baby monitor. Throughout the video, an orb can be seen hovering over the baby's crib. However, on a few separate occasions, the baby's legs can be seen being pulled by something, though you can't see by what. The movement is not one the baby would be able to make on its own, as it can actually be seen being dragged around the crib. The orb also seems to move in the general direction that the baby is being pulled. Given that not many sane parents would be willing to set up a rather cruel hoax like this, it may be a little less easy to dismiss. This one is really freaky. This is the footage captured by a surveillance camera aimed at a valuable World War II era ventriloquist doll in its case. In the middle of one night, the case door begins to swing open and closed, but the most disturbing part of the video is when the doll's eyes open and close and its lips appear to move. In addition to this, orbs can be seen flying around throughout the video. How would you personally try to explain this one? Most new cars these days come equipped with high-tech camera systems, some of which can detect when a person is present around the car to help the driver stay more aware and avoid hitting anyone. But what if your car detected someone that wasn't there? This man took out his phone and began to record when he noticed on the dashboard of his M3 that the car was sensing the presence of a person in the front right of the car. However, there is no one visibly standing out there. This could seem like a scene straight from the movie Bird Box. This last video was taken during a police operation in Brazil in what appears to be an abandoned hospital. The police all seem to be confused and shook as they witness what appears to be a door repeatedly swinging open and slamming shut on its own.
Cuidado, Judá. Cuidado, mano. Que é isso, mano? Mano, não tem nada. Caralho, mano. Que é isso, bicho? Caralho, mano. Mano, que é isso, bicho?
As they examine the door, no strings or any other forms of trickery could be seen in the video.
Deus me livre, mano. Vai, mano. Vai, mano. Vai, mano. Vai, mano.
The group of officers run away after something behind them falls. It's unknown what it was. This holds up to be one of the more credible videos that have recently surfaced on the internet.
So throughout history, there have been some ferocious creatures that have roamed the earth, and it seems the biggest and most dangerous have since gone extinct. For this list, I won't be including very well-known animals such as the Spinosaurus or T-Rex, or for the most part, any other dinosaurs. Number 10. Gigantopithecus. This creature was a monstrous ape, closely related to the orangutan that roamed the bamboo forests, jungles, and mountains of China, India, and Vietnam during the Pleistocene time period. It was a vegetarian, but still probably not a sight for sore eyes. It could grow up to 3 meters tall and weigh up to 1,200 pounds. Its strength was undoubtedly extraordinary and probably kept it safe from most predators, and it probably would not hesitate to use its strength against a human who got too close for its comfort. It went extinct 300,000 years ago, possibly due to overhunting by early humans, or as the result of climate change. Number 9. 3-foot-long scorpions. Officially known as Pomanoscorpius, these creatures were very similar to today's scorpions, but could grow up to a meter long and were armed with sharp claws and a venomous stinger. It's not known how deadly the venom was, but considering the large amount it injected with each attack, it was more than likely very deadly. During the time period that these things were around, there were also giant roaches the size of house cats, dragonflies the size of hawks, and millipede relatives up to 3 meters long. Number 8. Giant crocodiles. If normal crocodiles weren't bad enough, there was once a creature now known as Parasaurus, which was more than twice the size of a regular crocodile. It lived in South America 8 million years ago, and would grow up to 13 meters long. That's more than twice as long as the largest species of crocodile alive today. It would be fully capable of swallowing a human whole. These giant crocodiles were capable of fighting T-Rexes and winning. Number 7. Quetzalcoatlus. Undoubtedly the most horrifying living thing to ever come from the sky, these creatures were gigantic predatory birds standing at about roughly the same height as a giraffe. Some of them had wingspans of 12 to 15 meters, making them as large as a small plane. What was rather strange about the creatures were their body proportions. They had ridiculously long legs, necks, and beaks, and very small bodies, as well as relatively short wings. Scientists believe that they did not hunt in the air, but rather walked on the ground hunting for any animal they could catch and swallow whole, and that may have included dog-sized, or maybe even man-sized creatures. Number 6. Megalodon. This enormous, extinct creature is the biggest species of shark to have ever existed. It's generally thought to have looked similar to the modern great white. However, while a great white shark can grow up to be 20 feet long and over 7,000 pounds, Megalodon was estimated to be 60 feet in length, weighing anywhere from 50 to 100 tons. Megalodon only died off about 2.6 million years ago. This means that he often interacted with animals that are still around today, like giant sea turtles, porpoises, and even whales. If these guys were still around, it would just be one more reason to stay out of the ocean. Number 5. Gorgonops. Before dinosaurs came along, the planet was still full of giant, horrifying monsters. A prime example is Gorgonops, an animal that lived 260 million years ago, way before the dinosaurs became the dominant predators. At around 6 to 10 feet in length, Gorgonops was such a fast and vicious predator that it quickly rose to the top of the food chain. Of course, it also helped that Gorgonops had massive canines so large they nearly protruded beyond its lower jaw. Number 4. Terror birds. These birds were the top predators in South America and parts of North America during the Miocene, Pliocene, and early Pleistocene periods before they were replaced by big cats and other carnivorous mammals. Unlike Quetzalcoatlus, they were unable to fly, but could run very fast, some speculate as fast as a cheetah, and of course they were very large, with the largest of the species growing up to 3 meters tall and weighing up to half a ton. Their main weapon was their head, which could grow up to a meter long, allowing them to swallow prey as large as a dog in one single gulp. However, thanks to the hooked tip of the bill, which was used as a weapon, the terror birds could kill and devour prey much larger than a dog, including horses, camels, and humans if they were around at the time. Number 3. Titanoboa. Being the largest snake to ever exist, Titanoboa grew upwards of 15 meters long and weighed over a ton. It lived in the warm climates of the tropics 60 million years ago. It killed its prey by squashing it like the modern boa constrictor, and there's pretty much nothing that thing couldn't squeeze like a tube of toothpaste. Meaning, this thing would eat you like a boa constrictor would eat a guinea pig, which is why you should be happy it's extinct. Number 2. Arthropleura. If you've ever seen a centipede or millipede crawling through your backyard and you thought that was a whole lot of nope, or perhaps seen or heard of the giant centipede and thought those things were horrifying, then you might not want to know about the Arthropleura, which were massive millipedes that could grow up to 3 meters long. These things had few, if any, predators, and it's not actually known whether they themselves were predators or not, but either way, odds are you would not want to run into one of these things. And number 1, Mosasaurus. Fossil evidence suggests that Mosasaurus could reach as much as 50 feet in length, making it one of the largest marine predators of Earth's history. Mosasaurus's head was like that of a crocodile, lined with hundreds of razor-sharp teeth which could kill even the most well-armored enemies. Almost 3 times the size of the Leoplerodon, which was perhaps the next most ferocious sea predator, the Mosasaurus would be capable of eating a small boat in one bite today.